So Mark or Liz, just let me know when we're ready to go. Good afternoon and welcome. We are going to begin with the Pledge of Allegiance, and I am going to ask all my colleagues to unmute and please join me. I pledge allegiance
to the
to the
flag
flag
of
of
the
the United States of America and to the republic
for which
for
it
which it
stands,
stands,
one nation,
one nation,
under God,
under God,
indivisible,
indivisible,
with liberty
with
and
liberty
justice for all.
and justice
for
for all. Thank you. Because this is a remote session, I am going to ask Ms. Sullivan if she could please call the roll.
Mr. James,
Present.
Dr. Coleman,
Present.
Dr. Rivera,
Present.
Ms. Robinson,
Present.
Mr. Tran,
Present.
Mr. O'Neill,
Here.
Ms. Oliver Davila.
Present.
All members are present.
Thank you, Ms. Sullivan. Today's retreat is being shared live on Zoom. It will be rebroadcast on Boston City TV and posted on the school committee's webpage, bostonpublicschools.org/school committee, and also on YouTube. Today's agenda has been translated and posted on the committee's webpage, bostonpublicschools.org/school committee under the January 21st link. The committee is pleased to offer live simultaneous interpretation throughout the meeting in Spanish, Cantonese, Mandarin, Vietnamese, and American Sign Language. After I finish introducing the interpreters, we will activate the interpretation icon, the globe at the bottom of your screen. Click the icon to select your language preference. In order to access this feature, you must update to the latest version of Zoom. Please visit support.zoom.us. I'm going to ask our Spanish interpreters to please introduce themselves, and also you could please ask your Spanish speaking audience to switch their Zoom channel into Spanish.
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair. Good evening, everyone. My name is Juan Bernal. I am one of the simultaneous interpreters being assigned to this meeting. I will be interpreting for those in need of interpretation from English into Spanish. I will now explain how to access the feature for simultaneous interpretation for the Spanish-speaking population. Muy buenas noches para todos. Mi nombre es Juan Bernal. Soy uno de los intérpretes contratados para esta reunión para interpretar simultáneamente. Vamos a estar interpretando en intervalos de 30 minutos con mi colega Randolph. La forma en cómo van a accesar la información ustedes de interpretación, busquen en la parte baja de la pantalla. Van a ver un círculo que es el icono de la interpretación. Tienen que apretar y seleccionar el idioma español para que puedan escuchar la interpretación simultánea. Aquellas personas que tengan un teléfono celular, en la parte de arriba derecha de la pantalla, apretan los 3 puntos, van a ver el icono de la interpretación. Si no ven el icono, entonces tienen que subir la versión más actualizada de Zoom. Irían a la página www.zoom.us/download. Thank you very much. Muchas gracias. Please proceed, Madam Chair.
Hello, hi, my name is Randolph Dominguez. I am one of the simultaneous interpreters that will be working with you tonight. Also with my colleague, Juan Bernal. We will be working in half-an-hour intervals. I will now explain the same to the Spanish-speaking community here present. Muy buenas tardes. Mi nombre es Randolph Domínguez. Voy a ser uno de los intérpretes simultáneos que va a estar trabajando con mi colega Juan Bernal en intervalos de 30 minutos. Espero que disfruten la noche y muchas gracias por todo. I'm all set, Madam Chair.
Gracias. I'd now like to ask our Mandarin interpreters, Tina Wang and Bao Chen, if you could please introduce yourselves and give Zoom instructions in Mandarin.
Thank you，欢迎大家，我是您的普通话同声传译 Tina 王婷。今晚我和我的搭档陈彪一起为您提供普通话的口译服务。稍后您会在银幕的底部看到带有翻译字样的地球图标。如果您上不了 Zoom， 请更新你的 Zoom 软件，软件是那个英文支持 support， 然后一个点儿，然后那个英文那个软件 Zoom 的拼写，最后再加上一个点儿，再加上美国 US 就可以了。好，现在请我的搭档陈彪介绍，谢谢各位。陈彪，
谢谢大家。我今天很高兴跟大家一起来跟王庭合作为大家提供中文普通话的同声传译服务。如果大家从这个 Zoom 底下一个圆圈那地方可以选择中文上面进来听。如果说这个软件没有更新的话，可以找那个最新的这个支持的版本进来，你下载之后来听听。希望大家能够有个很好的一个会议的体验。谢谢大家。Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to now ask our Cantonese interpreters, Anna C. and Terry Yin, if you could please introduce yourself and give Zoom instructions in Cantonese.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Hi, everyone. I am your Cantonese interpreter for the evening. And 大家好，我係你今晚嘅同步翻譯廣東話嘅翻譯員。我同我嘅同事 Terry 咧都會為大家提供同步翻譯廣東話嘅。咁你一陣間會見到圖標下面咧有個地球儀嘅。咁你點落去嘅時候咧就揀 Cantonese 廣東話，你就會聽到我哋嘅同步翻譯㗎啦。多謝大家參與今晚嘅會議。Thank you, Terry.
Thank you, Anna. 大家好，大家晚上好，我名叫 Terry。今日我咧就會同我嘅同事 Anna 同大家咧做呢個同步翻譯嘅。咁如果咧你哋可以喺個屏幕下邊咧揾到個地球嘅圖標，如果你用手機嘅話咧，可以用3個點點下嗰個，之後咧就有語言嘅服務嘅嚇。如果咧你咧個睇唔到我哋嘅翻譯嘅話，可能係你嘅軟件咧係冇更新嘅，你可以去到呢個網站啦 support.zoom.us 嚇嗰度去下載最新嘅版本。多謝大家喎 ，Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I would now like our Vietnamese interpreters, Carolina Lee and Duyen Tru, if you could please introduce yourselves and give Zoom instructions in Vietnamese.
Xin chào buổi tối, tôi tên là Duyên Triệu, tôi là người thông dịch người Việt Nam. Nếu anh chị có cần người thông dịch thì sẽ vui lòng nhấn vào cái quả cầu ở phía dưới màn hình để có sự cung cấp của thông dịch và cần phải có cái phần mềm mới nhất Zoom.us plus download để mà anh chị có thể vào cái Zoom này. Xin cảm ơn ạ. Thank you.
Thank you. I would also like for our ASL interpreters to introduce themselves, Crystal Chung and Sarah Kuznetsky.
Hello, I'm Sarah Kuznetsky. I'm the ASL interpreter.
Hello, I'm Crystal Chun. I'm an ASL interpreter.
Thank you. Thank you, all of you, for assisting us this evening. We will now activate the interpretation icon at the bottom of your screen. I just want to remind everyone, if you could please speak at a slower pace to make sure that our interpreters are able to keep up with their interpretation. Thank you to everyone who has signed up for public comment. For today's retreat, the public comment.
Cảm ơn tất cả các quý vị đã tham gia vào cái buổi họp của chúng tôi tối nay.
For today's retreat, the public comment period will be limited to 15 minutes and will begin at 7:45 p.m. If you are scheduled to testify, if you could please make sure that you are signed into Zoom under the same name that you used to sign up for public comment. You can use the Zoom tools to rename yourself so that committee staff will be able to recognize you when it comes time to call on you. Thank you in advance for your cooperation.
Cảm ơn quý vị đã.
I want to thank AJ Crabble, Director of Governance for the Council of Great City Schools, of which our district is a partner, and our Vice Chair is very much involved in and has been for years, for facilitating today's session on effective governance practices. Mr. Crabble started working with the Boston School Committee in December leading both a professional development training and a retreat to help us refocus on our core mission of improving student outcomes. Yesterday, he facilitated a discussion to help the committee select goals regarding student outcomes and guardrails regarding adult inputs. Today, Mr. Crabble will lead a discussion on evaluating school committee meeting design, evaluating task force and/or committee design, evaluating committee effectiveness and superintendent effectiveness. And before we start, I just want to invite our superintendent if she'd like to make any
Trước khi
brief
bắt đầu,
remarks.
chúng tôi sẽ mời sự tham dự của
Madam Chair, thank you for hosting these retreats. I think that that was an extremely valuable evening yesterday, and I look forward to today. And thank you, Mr. Crabbill, for helping us to facilitate.
Great. Thank you so much. And thank you to all my colleagues. I know it's another night of a 4-hour meeting. So I really appreciate all of your time. And now I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Crabble.
Good evening. And again, wonderful to be with you. We'll actually start this evening by diving directly back into the work that we began last night. And so what happened as school committee members, you began by diving into strategic plan to try to identify what are some of the key items that describe the community's vision. What is the community desires for students to know and be able to do? What were some of the most key, the high need, high leverage elements that exist within the strategic plan that can be pulled out and identified as a focus for the board regarding the vision of the community. And then after we did that, as a school committee, you went back into the strategic plan and pulled out a set of ideas that really represent the values of the community that you as a school committee can then cause to be the focus of your work over the life of the strategic plan, with a set of ideas about the vision of the community and the values of the community. What we've done, your staff and I, have tried to take all the feedback that you created yesterday and synthesize it as a starting point. So before we dive into how to use these vision and value statements that help drive the focus of the school committee, first, I want to complete the process of creating some amount of consensus around them by sharing the work that was done yesterday, the work that was done last night by your tireless staff, who I'm fairly confident haven't slept since last night's meeting. And then once there's some consensus among committee members, then we can move forward with how to use these to help focus the work of the committee going forward. Before we dive in, any questions about that agenda? Any questions about that? Excellent. And the only additional face I'm seeing, Kaimani, great to have you with us this evening. Good to see you again. So what I will do again is I will start by sharing my screen, but it's the exact same document that we stepped into last night. And so if you still have that or your staff can provide access to that, then you can see it there, but I'll also pull it up here. Are you able to see my screen at this point?
Yes.
Excellent. So here's the work that we began last evening, with you all coming up with a set of goals, ideas, statements to describe what is the vision of the community, what do we want, what does our community want our students to know and be able to do. And you generally hone those down to 5 major areas. This first area really kind of focusing on what is it that is the experience for students as they're moving toward graduation. This next area that really focuses in on needs of English learners and students with disabilities. This next area really looking at early literacy, concern around is the school system developing students' ability to think critically and reason and discern. And then finally, a conversation around around the types of studies that students are engaged in on their way to graduate, as distinct from area 1, which is really looking heavily at their preparation and graduation and beyond. In addition to these ideas about the goals, the vision of the community, what the community most wants to see students know and be able to do, we also had a conversation about guardrails. These are really the values of the community. As the school system is moving toward the vision, toward the goals, what are the non-negotiables that the school committee is responsible for protecting on behalf of the community, for ensuring that these values are being honored on the journey to accomplishing the goals. And so these are the five areas that you all identified. First is really around the relationship between the school system and really your community and customers. Then a conversation around the curriculum and kind of the experience that students have instructionally. Then a segment that was really focused on how do we close gaps? How do we make sure that there are inclusive practices taking place? Item 4 was really about this idea of ensuring that there is equitable distribution of resources and attention to inclusivity in the work of the school system. And then item 5 was really wanting to make sure that there was a holistic set of supports and resources for students socially, emotionally, and physically. Taking those, here's what we developed. Just open up by describing a bit of the process. After creating a strategic plan with extensive community engagement, the school committee adopted goals that describe the community's vision, what the students will know and be able to do, and guardrails that describe the community's values must be honored on the journey to accomplishing the goals. Obviously, I'm speaking in the past tense. None of this has been adopted, hence the word draft. But once adopted, and this will be the second part of our time together today, these goals and guardrails communicate the focus of the committee's work, how it will self-organize, what it does and doesn't focus on, how it evaluates superintendent's recommendations, but also how it evaluates the superintendent's performance herself. And so from those items above, here are the items that staff and I put together to try to synthesize into SMART goals about student outcomes, the things that you all mentioned yesterday. So I want to take a moment and just let you look at this, the potential goals. The strategic plan vision was really copied and pasted directly from the strategic plan, but to give some more context. And then you'll also notice in parentheses, there are numbers. Those refer back to progress measures that are actually in the strategic plan. So to try to make it clear that we're not throwing out all of the community engagement that was done with the strategic planning process, but that we're making sure that they're interwoven. So take a moment and review these potential goals. Again, the committee hasn't adopted anything. These are just ideas based on your ideas for your consideration. Take a few minutes to read through this, and then we'll talk about it.
Are we only supposed to be looking at the goals right now?
Oh, yeah, just the items on the screen.
Okay, all right, because I can't scroll down. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, we'll go to the
Okay.
guardrail next.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure. It's all right, thanks.
And with that, let's just get the conversation started. What are the questions, comments, modifications? This is your work. Your staff and I have just tried to synthesize your work, but this belongs to you all. So if this is reflective of what you intended, then wonderful. But if it's not, this is really yours to own. And so the conversation is yours on what to add, delete, modify. The floor is open.
And since I can't see all of you, please, go ahead, Hardin, Dr. Coleman.
Great, thank you. No, this is a remarkable, very good, strong work, and I think it's coming together in this way. I have comments about the third and fourth bullet. I'll start with the fourth. I want to put on the table that the proficiency is too low. That if we really are thinking about our children being college and career and life ready, proficiency is too low bar for us. I think we have to I would like us to consider upping the bar, at least, dividing what % will be proficiency, and then also who will be that step above. I think that's going to be, feel more comfortable we did that. And as much as I agree with point number 3, before I be comfortably signing off on that, I need to know, because the BPS will create the conditions for students to arrive in grade 3, ready to thrive in school. There's so much at that early level that is not necessarily within our wheelhouse. So I would want to, and maybe I'm moving into guardrails, but I would want to know more about how that would happen before I would want us to commit to that. Thank you.
And I agree with Dr. Coleman on that point 3, which is what I think I said yesterday, is that for the pieces that we have control over, but if we don't, if it's something that we participate in but don't directly control, I think we need more information. I thought that yesterday part of Dr. Rivera's points were that we were going to work around not just ELL with disabilities, but just ELL students in general on language development and acquisition, but I don't know if I'm mistaken about that. However, I would like to see that as well, not just with ELL students with disability. And then my question is, I wasn't sure that I understood the BPS will cultivate with resilience. I don't know what that means. On bullet 2.
Well, and again, this is your document. So if there's anything that doesn't fit, doesn't make sense, this was the attempt of myself and staff to engage in meaning making, but there is no pride of authorship. Our job was simply to set you up for success. So if something needs to be deleted, just say the word, and we are co-creating. You all are co-creating this in real time.
Madam Chair, may I make a comment?
Also, I would jump in, Dr. Casillas. I think part of the last 2 questions are actually for you, which was on this item. To what extent is this fall within the capacity and the wheelhouse of the school system?
So I believe that we have a responsibility to having students ready for grade 3. And the measurement and the outcome here is reading fluency. I'm not sure fluency is the best measure. I had suggested comprehension, but there's reading, there's comprehension, there's fluency. But there can be a number of other, there's vocabulary, there's a number of things that are measured. So it's what the school committee is thinking they would like to do, but I think that there is some level, because we do offer UPK in our schools. We have kindergarten, we have first and second grade. So we may not be able to control 0 to 3 or 0 to 4, but we do have some control with our K1, K2 classes and grades prior to the grade 3. I think Michael had his hand up as well. Mr. O'Neill.
Yeah, thank you, Superintendent. I just have a couple comments. One, I think logically, we may just want to put it in order as our students progress. So start with, ready for grade 3, move to English learners, move to 3rd, 9th, and 11th, and finish with students graduating is one way to think of it. I would encourage us to take off the words NWEA map, because that happens to be an individual vendor, and just simply grade level expectations on the appropriate comprehension assessment. And lastly, I do note, particularly as we adjusted point number 2, we are now still not saying anything about our students with disabilities. And I feel that that is important to have some acknowledgement for them as well.
Instead of where it says English learners with disabilities, couldn't it be English learners and students with disabilities to combine to make sure you're focusing on both groups? I know it shifts what the original intent, but at least gives you the opportunity of making sure that we're not leaving either group out.
I agree with the vice chair and also with you, Jerry. I don't know the combination only because one was about like English proficiency. And so for students with disability that we're not seeking English proficiency.
Right.
But I agree that
I guess
be.
my issue was improving progress of English learners and children with disability. And, I think we can figure out where the modifiers go, but yeah.
I think you're right if we take out the part about in English, because then we're just talking about their progress, whatever that might mean for, for them or for the other students.
Sorry, I just talked. Did I unmute? Did people miss me, or did I say something?
Yeah, we didn't hear you.
We didn't hear you.
I apologize.
So
I
hold
thought I
on.
did a good job of muting. So
Right before you dive in, I want to check and say, so I feel like I just missed a edit. So what is the, I think it was Alex speaking, I can't tell because I can't see you all. So what was the edit you were thinking of?
I was just saying that if we took out on number 2, point A, if it was just improve progress of English learners and students with disabilities, student growth percentiles, just take out the in English and in their home language.
Not sure. Where are we seeing this?
And number 2A.
I'm sorry. We're in the wrong place. That's what happened.
Oh, okay.
I was scrolling back and forgot that you all were looking at my screen. Sorry. There. That's why I was confused.
So I'll follow up what I tried to say. I was trying to say I want to thank the superintendent for her explanation, for how she was thinking about the goal of fluency, and how that her argument for how, since we do have them kindergarten to third, that we had the capacity to achieve those goals. So I'm comfortable with her explanation. So I'm more comfortable with that being one of our potential goals. So thank you.
Other comments, additions, deletions, modifications?
I think in that second bullet is just either we're going with one, which is ELL and students with disability, just a growth percentile, and taking out ELL access, or we're doing specific bullet for English language learners on ELL access test, and then disabilities.
So what's the pleasure? of the
I mean,
board?
I would say that we separate them. I think they're, I don't know how other people feel. Vice Chair also brought that up. I don't know if you wanted to see a separate bullet or for it to be together.
I know we're trying really hard to limit the number of bullets, but it would seem to me, it seems awkward that we're trying to put English language learners and students with disabilities in the same
in
bullet.
one bullet, yeah.
These are really important populations for us. And I would think that, so we add one more bullet, but to have one bullet for our students with disabilities, I think is very important.
You still have 5 here, and that's a workable number, and these are very closely aligned to what's in my superintendent evaluation now. We have significant work to do with our EL students as well as our students with disabilities. 22% of our students have disabilities and about 33% are EL. And so these are significant populations. And I do think that there is, from our conversation yesterday, the opportunity that, once you do these types of focused interventions and supports for these particular populations, all boats will rise.
So are you all thinking something like this?
Getting more students in an inclusionary classroom should be our default. So I'm very happy to see inclusion be a major goal for us.
I agree. That's also, Superintendent, that's also consistent with the policy vote that the school committee took before you joining us. And I think that would be consistent, with the primary effort. Obviously, there are a number of other things about our students with disabilities we could put in there. But I agree with you that a default position, the first thing should be inclusion, would be my sense.
I might offer a slight suggestion on number 4, because we have early childhood covered. We have 2 special populations covered that are major populations within our district that we need to do better for. We have graduation covered. It would be nice to see our middle years students get more focus. And bullet 4 could be focused at the middle school level for mastery in science, math, and literacy as a way to get at critical thinking and more of a preparatory for the rigor that we are hoping to have at high school level.
But where do we cover grades 4 to 6?
I don't see that here as a specific grade level. However, intermediate level grades, instead of being, maybe.
Because even when we look at the assessments, we're still skipping over grades 4 to 6. We've got 3, 9, 11, 7, and 8, but nowhere are we focusing 4 to 6. And that's a big leap from 3rd grade reading to 7th grade without somehow connecting.
We had, like the middle school was intended under the MyCap and MyPlan pieces.
Yeah.
But that's still
was from
grade 6. That's
six.
still-
Right. So what I was gonna say is that I wonder if we could on the, I forget which bullet it is here, the one that says K to 3, do we want to do K to 4?
Well, I wonder if we want to just use these as benchmarks more, Ms. Robinson, so that we are looking at early childhood, really 0 through grade 3 in a frame. And the measurement, that benchmark is the 3rd grade comprehension benchmark. Then we are doing EL and special education, more inclusionary type of practices for our EL learners, as well as our students with disabilities. And then getting at the critical reasoning, but the measures would be then at the 8th grade. And then we get into high school and the measure is a graduation measure.
Well, my concern is
the outcome measures.
Yeah, my concern is because of what happens for us right now in the district in grades 4 to 6, those are either the advanced work or excellence for all, where it seems that, you know, kids get divided and then those who are qualified get to are prepared to take exams for exam schools and others are not. And if so, how are we really critically looking at that experience? Either are we expanding excellence for all so that it's given that all 4th through 6th graders have this, but right now we have not done that. But so that, you know, we haven't really said what should be happening there.
Ms. Robinson, my hope is that if we adopt this approach, that will allow us to look more critically at the ways in which we've tried strategies to support advancement, like the way in which we prepare people for the exam, that may be a more universal intervention and not so segregated so early. So I think this will allow us to be more critical of some of our existing strategies that have not produced the type of equitable access that we all want.
Yeah, I would suggest, Ms. Robinson, it gets back to what you were saying last night around a strong curricular focus.
Right.
And, you know, and having rigor across the grade levels, whether it's a EFA program or some other type of program, because we do really need to we need to stop picking winners and losers.
Exactly.
And tracking our students the way that we do, because, you know, either they're in sub-separate, they're in non-diploma bound programs, they're in advanced programs like AWC, or they're in programs like, you know, exam schools. I mean, I think that, you know, this is kind of the general sense and the reckoning I think that we have to do as a committee around just tracking and the who does and who does not get a rigorous education or opportunities in the
exactly.
And so that's kind of what we have to answer to become more of an anti-racist community.
Other recommended modifications, additions, subtractions. And I definitely want to intentionally reach out to anyone we haven't heard from yet. Any comments?
Yeah, this is Kwok. I keep reading I keep seeing the reference to reading comprehension without any mentioning of writing. Is reading comprehension, does reading comprehension imply writing competency? Is that part of the literacy requirement, that reading comprehension also implies a writing competency or not? If it is not, then maybe reading comprehension should. Also it does.
Well, it should. So it's reading, it's listening, it's comprehension, it's vocabulary, it's writing, it's communicating. All of those are parts of a strong English language arts curriculum. And so those pieces should all be assessed within our ELA assessments, our English language arts assessments.
So when,
But we need to do more around writing.
right, see, so when like in item 1, when we refer to reading comprehension assessment, that does include, or implicitly, all other aspects of literacy. Is that right? Right.
I'm not certain that it depends on the interim assessment that you have and whether that includes a writing component to it. Many of the assessments do have writing components to them. And so it would just, if this was a value of this group, then we would have to ensure that any assessment would have a writing component to it as an outcome.
Okay.
So is there, so Kwok, were you recommending a particular modification or addition or deletion?
Oh, this is just my 2 cents. When I in the bullet 1, when I read reading comprehension assessment, in my mind, it does just refer to reading comprehension assessment alone as literally. So I was hoping to see something that would be a little more, that clause there, reading comprehension assessment, something that would be more inclusive in terms of literacy. So so reading and writing competency or something. My experience with my community is that a lot of us in the bilingual community do read very well, but when it comes to writing, they struggle with it. So just referring back to the educational arena, reading comprehension in my own understanding, it would just be reading comprehension. So I'd like to see something that would reflect both reading and writing competency rather than just reading comprehension.
Got it. Anyone else who we haven't heard from much? Kamani, I'm looking at you, bro. All right, then hearing no additional comments on this, we'll scroll down and look at.
I have one comment. Sorry.
Oh yeah.
Apologies. I struggled like looking at this because I don't necessarily want it to be I don't know necessarily that it's like a student outcome you can measure, but maybe it's in the guardrails. Just what struck me is that we're super focused, as we should be, on academic pieces. And maybe it fits under the holistic supports, but I was just thinking about that there's really not a lot of arts in here. That was just something that really stood out to me. But perhaps in that, I believe there was a point around like holistic, or maybe it was a guardrail that it was around like holistic, and that includes arts.
So if what you're trying to get at is something that students will specifically know or be able to do, then it would belong here. If it's something that you want students exposed to or to have access to, then it would belong there.
Yeah, so the second one.
Okay, then we'll come to
thanks.
it.
Great.
We'll come to
Thank
it.
you.
Any other reflections on your proposed goals? All right, and certainly you can always nudge us back in that direction if need be. Then based on the conversation about the community's values that need to be honored during the journey to the goals, here are the potential guardrails that you, based on what you identified last night. Take a moment to read through these, and then the floor is open for discussion. What additions, subtractions, modifications would you suggest? What additions, subtractions, modifications, or just general comments do you have?
I just, on bullet number 3, I don't know what the implementing practices that are disciplined. I would just take out the word disciplined. I don't really know what that means. It just should be gap closing practices that are research-based, data-driven.
Alex, let me take a shot at that, because I actually like that work, because one of the things that as I study the landscape, we often fail to implement our strategies with fidelity. So we talk like we're doing it, but we don't really do it in a disciplined manner. So that's how I read that word.
Mhm.
So that's what it meant to me. There may be a better word that's more meaningful to other people, but that ability to do that with fidelity across the district, I think is, we know we can do a lot of this really well in different settings, but we don't do it consistently across the district. That's what discipline means to me.
Okay, that I think like consistent or something, but yeah, I get that. That makes sense.
I would say that maybe a better way of expressing that is that we'll hold ourselves accountable to the implementation.
Yep.
And that we build in accountability measures, because I think I brought that up last night as well, is that we're missing the accountability, because we can say we'll enact or we'll deliver and we put it on paper, but unless we hold ourselves accountable for actually getting it done, and I think that's where we're getting at with that word disciplined. Or with fidelity, it's fine, but I think it's with fidelity, but also with monitoring and accountability.
I would argue that's what fidelity means. So whichever way, but I think we're we're agreement. I think now we're what the right word is. I have 2 other reactions. One is I don't know what the 4th bullet means. So I need to kind of understand what that means and what it acts like and looks like. And that's one point. And the second point is, and I know I'm a human capital guy, and everything that I read about school improvement and change gap closing across the country involves highly effective teachers. And so without that guardrail being there, that to me is central to teachers and leaders, principals, and their effectiveness and quality, and increasing them, retaining them, and making sure they're diverse is a very important guardrail for me.
Yeah, I would second that. Thank you. Thank you, Dr.
What modification would you recommend to accomplish that?
I don't think it's in any one of those bullets. It wasn't. I thought it was in the statements we made last night. Unfortunately, I threw out my notes, but it was in the. There it is. Recruit, retain highly effective, racially and linguistically diverse, culturally proficient workforce that can provide rigorous, culturally and linguistically affirming, inclusive curriculum and experiences that celebrate. So it's there. That piece is not in the guardrails below, as I see it. I may be wrong on that. If it's there,
It's not in there.
No, it's not there.
Is that a proxy for this?
No, not in my mind. It was the restorative structural change system. That's the one I don't understand. No, I don't think it's a proxy. I think those are separate and different. Oh, don't if someone on the team can explain that restorative structural change system to me, I would want to hear that before I took it out. The fact that I don't understand it doesn't mean it's not great.
Other additions, deletions, modifications?
I don't know that I necessarily in bullet point one, like the last two words and needs. I don't know, I just think it's where we want to create a partnership where people feel, valued and that students are seen as assets. I think we're always putting that and needs is like a very deficit to me anyway. Like I would hope that if you're building a partnership, there would be trust and you would get to that. We don't have to say it in this statement.
And then bullet number, oh, sorry, go on, Jerry.
No, I was going to say, I hear you, but at the same time, I know a lot of our students have a lot of needs and I want to make sure that they are addressed. So how do we make sure they are addressed if it's not explicitly there? And I don't see it so much as a deficit as much as a reality.
And on that one, to build on what Ms. Robinson just said, on that one, don't we also really want to specifically call out student voice? I'm not quite sure that's saying that recognizing their value is enough. To me, a real guardrail is we want to grow on. And Mr. James, I'd welcome your input and wordsmithing on this.
While he is working on his words, I would love if someone could explain to me where the second bullet came from, because I didn't see that in how that came from the ones we talked about last night, and understand why that is elevated to a guardrail when we have authentic voice and
I think it was from City, when we talked about City as a classroom and the value of partnerships, that we can't do it alone. And so we wanted to use our city, but then also, understand we're in a global context and that we use the cultural and linguistic wealth of the community. I don't know that we put
I
those two
keep-
together, but I know that the first
Yeah.
part of it was city as a classroom.
Yes, that's where it came from.
All right. I wouldn't have seen that in that wording. That's all. That's great. That's where it came from, but that doesn't.
And if there is a more apt way to communicate it, then this is the time. How would you change it?
Now let me think about. Let me think for a second. And
I also felt like it was two different points. So I felt like one was using the city as a classroom and creating also opportunity for students to understand they're in a global context. But then I thought that part of point one was like valuing assets and valuing families was also recognizing, leveraging, celebrating cultural and linguistic wealth, which I thought was I see it as a separate point. I see it as two different things.
So is there a piece that doesn't belong here that maybe belongs elsewhere?
would it work to take bullet number 2 and with some word modification add it to the end of what is now bullet number 3? And if you want me to work on that wording, I can see what I can do.
Appreciate it.
I think that bullet number 2, the leveraging cultural and linguistic wealth, can be part of bullet 1, which is BPS will leverage the, student and family communities, linguistic and cultural wealth to create authentic partnerships that recognize their value and assets.
All right. Hit me one more time.
So I was saying if you could move that leveraging culture and linguistic wealth and move it up to bullet point 1 where it's BPS will leverage the cultural and linguistic wealth of students and families to create authentic partnerships that recognize their values and assets. And then I'm okay with the needs. I hear what you're saying, Jerry. I don't know how.
Yeah.
But I do agree also with like the vice chair's point about the student voice because it's not super called out. So we should just have a separate bullet around the importance of student voice.
So not including it in this one?
I would separate it. I think it's a big deal. Like we're trying to always hear back from our students and also create student voice.
All right. Which bullet would you delete to make
Oh, I
room
have
for?
to delete a bullet? No, let me think about where I would add it. Sorry. I'm gonna say keep the student voice in bullet one. We just have to wordsmith it.
As you get a chance to think through some language, just feel free to shout it out. I'll get it added in there. Other thoughts, reflections, additions, deletions, subtractions?
I made a shot at that gap closing bulletin. I put that in the chat.
Okay.
Can you add in that first bullet? BPS will leverage the cultural and linguistic wealth of students and families to create authentic student voice and authentic partnerships. That has authentic twice, sorry, you can just take out the authentic student voice, or yeah, leave that one too, that's fine. And partnerships, yeah.
Minor point, but instead of create, should we say honor? So honor.
Yeah, that's
authentic
better.
Student
Yep.
voice.
Mhm.
And then make it and create partnership.
What do you think about value student voice? It seems a bit more
Yep.
useful in that you not
Yep.
just honor, but you're actually going to value it and use it.
Yep. Yep.
Yep, I like
That's
that.
fine.
Hi, everybody. Sorry that I had to step off, and sorry I've missed a part of this conversation. I'm back. So I wondered if maybe it could be like incorporate or facilitate something where I agree with Dr. Casalius, a little more, not beyond just valuing it. We can value and still not incorporate
Right.
or take it into consideration or implement. So yeah, thanks.
Any other additions, deletions, modifications?
Could we say in bullet 2, BPS will work with community partners to prepare students for unlimited global and local opportunities?
And then in bullet number 3, then you can take out the leverage our students' cultural and linguistic wealth because we put it earlier. Thank you. Yep. Good. So it's research-based and data-driven now.
Anything else? Okay, so while this is not at the final finish line, you'll probably take one more swipe at this. We clean all this up, add some numbers in to clarify some of these things, and then send it back to the subsequent meeting. But let's say we're going to work with these 5 guardrails and these 5 goals. Just for the sake of the rest of tonight's work, let's imagine that these are what a completed version of these is what the school committee is adopting. What we'll do with the rest of our time is we will take this information and then actually start plugging it in and think through, okay, given that these are our goals and guardrails, how does that inform the additional work that we'll be doing? Before we do that, however, I'd recommend we take a quick break. With that break, what I would encourage you to do, if you haven't done so already, is just take a little bit of time to look through these documents and just reflect on them a little bit more. Identify if you have any specific concerns or changes, additions that need to be accomplished. When we come back from the break, the first thing we'll do is start asking the question about if these are the focus, what does the board's use of time need to look like? We'll talk about that in the context of board meetings, but we'll also talk about that in the context of any task forces, subcommittees, things of that the school committee needs to spawn in order to do its work effectively. I've got 12 after. The work, if we come back at 20 after, that gives folks enough time to take a quick stretch. All right, see you at 20 after. All right, welcome back. So I cleaned up the document a little bit, so hopefully it's a little bit easier for folks to read. So now the next step in this process, now that we've got some rough draft of goals and guardrails to work with, the next step is to use those to start really thinking through how would we reorganize, how would we design our time. And so the first rule of this that I want to offer you is this idea that there are really now 3 criteria that the school committee would use for determining whether or not it's something that you're going to invest a significant amount of time in. Is it directly related to one of our goals? Is it directly related to one of our guardrails? Or is it legally required of us to do? As you reflect on those 3 criteria, is it directly related to one of our goals? Is it directly related to one of our guardrails? Is it legally required of us as a school committee to focus on? If you were to apply that standard, what might immediately change about how time is spent at school committee meetings? Let's start with just analyzing and thinking through school committee meetings. Think of a recent school committee meeting and ask yourself, if these were our goals and guardrails, and we set as a rule that the only things we're going to put on the agenda are things that are directly related to our goals, that are directly related to our guardrails, or that are legally required of us to do, what impact or what change might that impose on school committee meetings?
Wouldn't it directly impact the agenda items that show up?
Are there any agenda items that you currently spend time on that don't meet one of those 3 criteria?
Yes, I would say so.
So any
In the
particular?
past. Well, I think at our first retreat, I talked about this with the issue of the playground decision at the McCormick School to transfer that property to the Boys and Girls Club and the Richard Martin Foundation. You know, yeah, that was heavy for me. And it's definitely also, how do we think about, again, the racial equity planning tool and whether we actually apply that to also, you know, to decisions that we're making. But yeah, sorry, I had to bring that up again.
All right, so if there is a concern around playground equipment, what you say is that doesn't appear to be directly related to one of your goals, directly related to one of your guardrails. So unless there is a legal issue that obligates the work of the school committee, then it's possible that something about playgrounds might not make it onto the school committee's agenda. Am I hearing you correctly, Lorna?
Well, no, I don't know if I interpreted your question appropriately, actually. I guess it's really a question of how do we get items on the agenda for the school committee? Is really what I'm asking.
Yeah, so we're working toward that. We're just working toward it from the opposite direction. So the question I'm asking, as a way of getting access to that is, if we accepted the idea that the only things that the school committee would put on its agenda are things that are legally required to be there, things that you and only you all can address. So for example, hiring and firing of superintendents, I suspect is something that only the school committee can do. It's probably not something that you could, outsource to a task force, for example, that really the school committee has to do that. So you have a legal obligation to attend to that. So the items of that nature would always be on your agenda. So that's one criteria, if it's legally required, or if it's directly related to one of your goals or directly related to one of your guardrails. So if you applied that to the work of the school committee, what impact might that have? If you made the decision, we're not adding anything to the agenda unless it meets one of these three criteria, what impact might that have?
Can I ask a question about that?
Yeah.
Because it could be legally required, because that was a legally required decision we had to make and vote on whether we would approve the transfer of that property. But what if it goes against the other values in the guardrails? That's,
So
it's not like, you know, I know we're trying to, but those categories can overlap too, or be in conflict with each other. Those criteria could be, you know, there could be tension between them.
yeah, so as a school committee, when you say these are our goals and these are our guardrails, what you're really saying is, superintendent, you know, Brenda, we are giving to you the authority to make whatever judgment calls that have us moving in the trajectory of our goals, as long as those things don't violate any of our guardrails. So your superintendent is not given the authority to do anything that would that she would interpret as a violation of the guardrails. And so that's not something she should ever bring to you. And if you as a school committee say, wait a minute, this is inconsistent with one of our guardrails, then it would be appropriate for you to highlight that, to have that conversation with your employee. But what you were saying as effect is anything that is within the realm of moving in the trajectory of our goals while honoring our guardrails, moving in the trajectory of our community's vision while honoring the community's values. Any decisions that are within those parameters, we are delegating authority to our superintendent to make that decision. And only if it directly relates to our goals, guardrails, or legal obligation will we invest time in it. So if you adopted that as a practice, who else? What impact would that have on your agendas for your committee meetings?
I think, oh, go ahead. Somebody was going to talk.
No, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
No, go.
Okay. I was going to say that I think, you know, we have to be super cognizant of this decision that you're asking, because what I can foresee is things like that are interesting that school committee members want to know. So I think about like food, the food and nutrition, although that's a very important part of a child's life, of a student's life, it's not necessarily one of the goals. You could argue that it's in the last guardrail around social, emotional, physical, but that would be one example. Or like travel, people are interested in like where our students, well, maybe that's not a good one because we have a goal about, or a guardrail. So I think all I'm saying is that we would just have to know that not everything that we're interested in would come before us. So would impact it in that way.
That's correct. So if there's something that is within the realm of what you've delegated to your superintendent, you know, so for example, food, if you have a group of constituents and like we want, you know, pizzas on Wednesdays, you know, served at the middle schools. Because that is not a legal requirement, is not directly related to one of your goals and not directly related to one of your guardrails, then that is not something that you would then place on the agenda. You would maintain the delegation of that to your superintendent.
I guess my question then is, I mean, you could argue that the food is related to the last guardrail, which is around like the social, emotional, like wellness of students. So that's where I get a little bit confused. Like when I think about, for example, travel too, right? Travel, like we all want to know, but it does chew up our time. But although we have in the guardrail that we want students to have this like global context. So
Yeah, so part of what happens next in the process is you all have developed a draft set of goals and guardrails. Eventually you'll adopt a final set. And then in response to that, your superintendent will develop a set of progress measures that give you insight into how she is interpreting your goals, that interpreting your guardrails, progress measures that you can use to track, are we in fact moving in the trajectory of our goals and guardrails? And so at that point, if it's not directly in the language of the goals and guardrails, and it's not directly being measured by one of the progress measures, then everything outside of that is things that you've delegated to your superintendent. So I'm fairly confident that even with that guardrail, the superintendent is not going to have a progress measure about pizza. I could stand corrected. I doubt it. And so in that regard, then no, that would not wind up coming back before you. Same travel, unless under that particular guardrail, she has she chooses a progress measure around around field trips, then that would not come before you. A question that comes up in the chat box, Kamani asks, if it's not coming before us, who's it going before? It's going before the superintendent. That is the conversation you're having right now. What are the things that are so important, that are such a absolutely vital, vital representation of the community's vision and values, that we have to focus on them as a school committee. That these have to become the absolute focus of our attentions because of how critical they are. But in order to maintain focus on these vital items of the community's vision and values, in order to say yes to these, that means you're going to have to delegate other things. And so that's the response to Kamani's question. Is that's why this process is so important for a school committee, because you are literally deciding what things you're going to hold responsibility for directly. What are the things that are so important that they have to be what you all focus on, versus what are the things that, while still very important, you're going to instead delegate to your superintendent so that you can preserve for yourself the focus on the things that you consider the community's priorities.
Okay, so I have a question. This is what I thought a lot about last night, which, I think as we move through this process, focusing as you're talking about, then it puts a very different pressure back on the district itself in terms of how it's going about doing its business and responding to the customer needs. Because oftentimes what pushes us in one direction or another is what we hear in public comment, what people are asking for or focusing on, and wondering sometimes within ourselves, where does all of this fit together? And to respond to the public, our interest in learning more about issues that have been raised, I feel at times take us off focus, because it is something that's critical and we're trying to be responsive. But the question is now a better response that this is, that the district itself has to look at how it, in addition to school committee, is having opportunities to discuss issues with families, others, and get issues resolved so that they don't end up coming to us.
Yeah, things that are still legally required duties of the board still will come to you, whether they're part of your goals and guardrails or not.
I mean, for example, the issue around food. I mean, the quality of our food was not great. We now have a variety of things that are fixing the food services that are directly in schools, as well as menus, et cetera, kind of thing. And that's, a growing win within the district. So according to this, now, this would not necessarily be coming before us.
Right. So the example you just gave would almost certainly not be coming before you. If people had grave concerns about food menus at middle schools, they would be obligated to sort that out with, their principal supervisor, or their chief of schools, or their superintendent. But that's not something that would wind up on the agenda of the board. And this is the thing you have to understand about this. There is never going to be a day. There will never be a single day. Quick check, Brenda, how many employees do you all have?
1,000.
1,000?
10,000.
I was like, that didn't sound right. Yes, okay, there we go. That sounds right. It's like, what? Again, so there will never be a day where one of your 10,000 employees doesn't have a concern that they would really prefer to bring before the board. You have 40,000 students? 50,000 students? There will never be a day where one of the parents of your 50,000 students doesn't have a concern that they want to bring before the board. That day will never come. 365 days out of the year, that desire will be there. And so the challenge in this conversation is that, yeah, you're literally saying there are some things that are so central to the vision and value of the community that the only way that we can preserve time to focus on them is that we have to delegate everything that is not them elsewhere. And that means all these other matters that people might want to bring before the school committee, that is not problematic that they want to do that. They have every right to have that desire. The challenge doesn't lie with them. The challenge is a leadership challenge that lies with you. What are we going to focus our time on? Because to the extent that you invest 3 hours on pizza, those are 3 hours that you aren't going to invest in our students who are English learners getting what they need to be successful.
AJ, I'm wondering whether we want to distinguish between what happens in public comment, which we can't control, and what happens in
Public comment is a legal requirement. So there are 3 criteria, and that is a legal criteria.
So I think a lot of the things that Ms. Robinson, correct me if I'm wrong, was talking about are things that come to us in public comment. They don't come to us in the agenda.
Yeah, for example, the water issue, when we were starting to have the problem with water, we first heard about it in public comment. And then the district came back to us with process, but it was not an agenda. It was nowhere on our agenda till it came up in public comment.
Yeah, I guess part of what I'm seeing is these 5 guardrails. Just look at the guardrails, not the outcomes. And I could see us saying, we're gonna set out our agenda so that we're gonna deal that the items on these meetings will be about this guardrail, because I think as the superintendent indicated earlier, implementing this with fidelity and discipline is going to be one of our big challenges. And so organizing our meetings around reporting on how well it's going. So how well, let's have a report on how we're elevating student voice. And we're going to have that regularly through the year.
That's right.
And we'll have indicators, and then we'll have a report on each one of these 5, not all 5 every meeting, but we'll
that's right. You'll calendarize it.
And then that's what drives. So in the multi-tier support meetings, if we hear in public comment a lot about water, physical health, food, the superintendent's going to pick up that I need to address this in the next time multi-tiered support's on the agenda, or 2 times later, we're going to have a report on food.
So I don't know that you're ever going to have a report on food. If that is the desire of your hearts, then you'll want to make sure that is one of your guardrails. But if it's not there, then you'll probably literally never have a report in the board meeting. You'll still receive.
But I would see that as part of the physical well-being of our students.
If that's one of the progress measures.
Yeah.
So the progress measures will define the universe of those. And my suspicion is of all the different social, emotional, and physical indicators that could possibly be tracked, my guess is what you're feeding students in the lunchroom is not going to make the cut. If you only have 3 progress measures per guardrail and 3 progress measures per goal, I'm almost certain that's not going to make the cut. So what won't happen is you almost certainly won't get a report about which days you're doing chicken nuggets at a board meeting. Now, to be clear, that does not mean you won't be getting that information. The only thing we're talking about is what do you put on your agenda to spend time on during the committee meeting. And so you may still, in fact, get a report about that in your inbox, just as general information, so you understand the extent to which the superintendent is going about the work of the school system in a way that honors the community's vision and values. But you'd receive a report about that in your inbox. It's not something that you would spend a lot of time It's not something that you'd spend time on in a board meeting. So what I want to clarify here is we're not talking about what information the school committee gets. You still, whatever information you used to get it, you still get that and probably more. All we're talking about is how you spend time during school committee meetings. Kaimani, I see your hands up.
Thank you. I just feel the need to say that a lot of people, I feel like there are two primary reasons as to why people come to public comment. One can be because they don't feel as though their voices were translated in the policy or project that's being presented, or the other is that even if they did, they just disagree with what's being presented.
Yeah.
And those are the sort of the two primary forms of disagreement that I found.
Yeah.
And I think that if we are going to begin, and I feel as though we should have already been doing this, but especially now, if we're going to begin delegating some responsibilities and action items to the superintendent and to the district, there needs to be a very dramatic increase in the community and student outreach for these projects and presentations. Simply because, I think that a lot of my colleagues here, even though public comment is a legal requirement, it can be a lot. And in order for the community to, I'm not saying to do this as like a countermeasure so we can get less people to come to public comment, but so we can sort of change the trajectory of what people's source of disagreement is from. Exactly. Yeah. So I think that there needs to be a dramatic increase. Some ideas is going to headmasters and saying like, hey, like if headmasters in schools do a monthly sort of, I'm not really sure what the word is, auditorium meeting, assembly, that's the word, assembly, then, sort of tell the heads of schools like, hey, bring this issue up in your assembly and maybe create a survey about it and ask students what they think, or maybe have headmasters delegate it even further to teachers, or the working groups that the superintendent and the district are putting together around issues, have members of those working groups go back to community members and ask, hey, I'm on this working group doing X, Y, and Z. What do you think? And also making sure that the working group is composed of not just people who have historically been on working groups or like who know about the issue, but like make sure to like also get some adults and students on there who are like really like closest to the pain, closest to the where the work is going to impact them. So those are just some ideas I have floating around my head about how to really increase community and student engagement so that when we have people coming to public comment and expressing their frustration, it's not a lot of like, what is this? Like, what is this that you're laying before me? Like, what's going on right now? Like, I wasn't even invited to it and invited to discuss, etc. But it's more so, it's more so opinionated on it's more so addressing the actual project or presentation in itself.
Yeah, we talked about this. Yeah, we talked about this a little bit yesterday, Kaimani, and that, and so I'd double down on that and go so far as to say, if there are a significant amount of community members using school committee meetings as a way to get access to customer service, that is indicative of something somewhere else in the school system missed the customer service opportunity, and people are flowing to the school committee as a response. To me, the answer isn't how do we cut off public comment. The answer is exactly what you said. How do we ensure that the appropriate avenues for customer service are taking place elsewhere? Brenda, I saw you wanting to jump in there on this comment.
Yep, and I saw that Dr. Rivera also has her hand up, but just briefly, we set up the district-wide equity roundtables this past spring as a way to raise issues and to be transparent and provide opportunity for comment and engagement. And then we also set up school-based equity roundtables in each and every school. And so what we are still doing is formalizing this new structure and providing training to our school leaders and developing the templates that will be used to be able to cascade the information from the district-wide, say we're taking on a big policy, and we discuss it. We provide the data at the district equity roundtable, and then that is given to school leaders in their all principal meeting. And then they're expected to take that to their parent councils and to their equity roundtable. And then you get this broad-based kind of saturation of people knowing what the things are that we'll be discussing. I think that's important. And then just finally, I'd mention, and similar to Kamani's comments, is when people come to school committee, oftentimes it is a particular issue that matters to them or their individual school. And these things should be handled at the school level, at the equity roundtable, and discussed, and or at the parent council level. And then, if not, then brought to a higher level. And so we still have to kind of tighten those structures up, I think, within our engagement processes.
Yes, well, thank you again. I really, again, appreciate this whole session, because we don't have these opportunities to reflect like this. I'm wondering, though, it makes me think about what have been the most sort of heated and most painful discussions at school committee have been around the build BPS, right? Where we're merging schools, potentially closing some, well, they closed the school, and so build PPS, school police, right? These are things we need to vote on and do fundamentally, like the buildings, right? And what we could do in terms of programming. I mean, the seats, the strands we're able to offer. I mean, everything really is tied to our buildings in a way, right? And again, Mr. Crable, like Boston, right? We have like the oldest school district, right? The oldest buildings in the nation. So we have very specific problems that I'm not sure other school districts have to deal with that to the extent that we do. So my question to my fellow members is, I don't know how comfortable I feel like just sort of delegating everything around, say, something like build BPS or the school police, to the superintendent and her executive and her team. Because to me, those are issues that are related to our guardrails, are related to our student outcomes. How do we make those decisions?
Yeah, this is probably about the hardest part of any leadership's journey, is knowing how and when to invest their time. This is true whether you're a superintendent, whether you're a school committee member, whether you're the executive for a large organization or corporation. Like, the one thing that we've all been gifted is the exact same number of minutes in every single day. And as leaders, trying to figure out how to invest those minutes is critical, because how you invest those minutes determines what is more likely to get done and what is less likely to get done. If you all as a school committee invest the limited time you have into 100 different things, none of those is any more likely to bear fruit as a result of that. You will feel better about it, and you will have a warm, fuzzy feeling, and people will say nice things about you on Instagram, but you won't have actually accomplished anything for children because your efforts would have been so spread. If you really want to get things done, one of the hardest parts of the leader's journey is being intentional about how am I investing the very finite number of minutes I've been given, and the more that I focus on. So the analogy we use here in Texas is, do any of the 9 of you drive a truck? Any truck driver? Yeah, I didn't think so. So you ask that question in a room of 3 people in Texas, and the answer is going to be yes for somebody. So I'll ask, all right, who here drives the biggest truck? That's the question I'll ask. And somebody will say, oh, definitely me. And it's usually like this little bitty grandma, somebody who's driving this massive monster truck. It's like, all right, so how many miles per gallon does your truck get? And she'll say, oh, it gets about 12 miles a gallon. Wonderful. So now imagine you have 2 identical trucks, and you still have that 1 gallon of gas, and you divide it between the trucks. How far will the trucks go? Anybody have guesses? Anybody have a guess? How far will the 2 trucks go? No guesses?
I was going to say, it depends. It'll depend on a number of issues.
So you've got a truck that goes 12 miles to the gallon. You got 1 gallon. You divide it among 2 trucks.
You would assume
6
it would
miles.
get 6 miles, but
So
you
it's
would
somewhere
assume-
around 6 miles, a
assume.
little bit less, but somewhere around 6 miles. Great. You divide that 1 gallon of gas among 4 trucks. Now, how far will each truck go?
3 miles. 3 miles.
Yeah. And so the thing to get clear about is the more priorities you have, the less distance you're going to be able to push each of those priorities. But here's where it gets really important to be clear about. If you divide that 1 gallon of gas among 20 trucks, how far will each of those 20 trucks go?
Not very far.
They probably won't start. Any ideas why?
Because how much gas does it take?
How much gas does it take just to initiate combustion?
Yeah, they won't go.
After a certain point of diluting your energy, you ain't going nowhere. And this is one of the fundamental struggles that all leaders must face, is that there will never be a day where there aren't 100 things that are highly important and worthy of your attention. But when you choose to spread yourself among those 100 things, none of them is going anywhere. There'll be a bunch of really large trucks sitting in a very crowded parking lot, but they won't have gone anywhere. And you may, in fact, feel very good about having spent a little bit of time here and there and ran around and done all these things. But children will be sitting in the parking lot of their education, not having actually gone anywhere. And that will be because you failed as a leader. This is the challenge that leadership commits us to. How do we get focused on the vision and values of the community in a way that actually increases the likelihood of getting them done? So yes, I want to be incredibly clear what I'm saying. The recommendation, the coaching I'm offering you is that you get clear about what are the highest priority, highest need, highest leverage areas of the community's vision and values. You write them down in the form of a set of goals and guardrails. Your superintendent comes back with 1 to 3 progress measures for each. And then on a go-forward basis, if it's not one of those things or legally required, that you choose not to invest time in it, instead delegate it to your superintendent. Not because you don't care about the other things, but because of the priority that you place on the things that you did say were the most important elements of the community's vision and values. So to be very specific, Lauren, if we were talking through this, you said, wait a minute, facilities is just absolutely crucial. We got to spend time on facilities. Then what I would say to you, look at that list of 5 potential guardrails and decide which one you want to delete and replace with facilities. And that is absolutely an appropriate move for you to make if you feel like that is one of the 5 most vital areas of value for the community. If that's the case, then replace whichever one is less representation of the community's values with that one. So for example, when I went through this nearly identical process with my board, one of the things that was really important to us was community engagement, kind of what Kamani said. And so one of our guardrails was around community engagement, very similar to the fact that you all have one that's around community engagement, because it was one of the top values of our community. So if you feel like there's something that's not represented on that list that is a absolute non-negotiable, then the time to have that conversation is right now. Is that, Lauren, is that responsive to your inquiry?
Yes, but we want to support the superintendent too. So I just, when it's a hard issue. I mean, the school police is another one, like these things are coming up and they're very important and related to student outcomes. So I'll defer to others because I've talked a lot about this. So.
Yeah.
Lauren, I really appreciate you saying this because this will be the tension. And the degree to which if we're going to go, the way I think about it, if we're moving to an outcome-based board, and that's what we are responsible for, there are crises and organizational challenges that's no longer our job to do something about. We want to understand it And as the superintendent asked to meet with us each of us all weekly, as we have other opportunities in task force and other ways that we can communicate with the community, but issues like what in our guardrails, where do the police belong in our regular reporting structure versus there's a concern and a problem with the police. That's an operational concern, and that's the superintendent's job. That's going to be very difficult for the Boston community to deal with, because they're going to want us to look like we're doing something about it to manage this crisis. And that's when we get sucked into operational stuff, not policy stuff. And we don't have the ability to do the operations. And that's when it gets all mixed up and we're not clear. So we have an agenda item for the superintendent. We have goals for her, and she has responsibilities. And then if we're dissatisfied with her performance on our goals, we act on that. We don't act on whether we like the way she did it with the police unless we see how it affects the goals. That's going to be very hard for us.
I think I saw hands from Jerry, Michael, and Kamani. Okay, Michael?
So I would say a couple of things. And Dr. Rivera, you're bringing up the really important conversation right now, because this is the crux of the matter. And so we have to almost go back now to the goals and the guardrails
Yeah.
and read them through again and say, ooh, whoops, what do I want to make sure that is included in here, that as some things come up, you're going to want to be able to point back and say, okay, the school policing issue, well, that affects we were talking yesterday about the physical well-being of our students, right? And we also talk about discipline. I mean, there are a number of ways that you can fit a number of topics under if you want to. So I think Mr. Crabbill will probably tell us, when we talk with other boards across the country, the first reaction is they end up doing a lot of mental gymnastics to take a topic to fit it, or verbal gymnastics to take a topic and fit it into a guardrail.
Yeah.
And then it's almost like the 5 stages of grief, right? Then they kind of adapt and start to get more disciplined in saying, no, that's something we're going to delegate to the superintendent. It's not the effective use of our time. We only have so many hours. And then they will also make adjustments, as Mr. Crabbill suggested. Maybe you take out a guardrail and say that's not working. I mean, it's a living, breathing document. Yeah. So we adjust it over time. I will also share, though, that other boards across the country talk to our peers in Philadelphia, as example. This is their terminology right now that they use, as much as we talk about build BPS and weighted student funding and other buzzwords that we're comfortable with all the time. They are using goals and guardrails as part of their regular verbiage, because it is, they have found it uplifting to say, no, this is what we're focused on, and this is what we're trying to accomplish. And they're using it now to say, peel away. Now, it doesn't mean you go 100% of the time to only do things that are focused on goals or guardrails or legally required. This is just as, we talk about aspirational goals and then we talk about operational goals. This is a goal for us to only be focused on these 3 things, but there will be some things that come up that we're going to want to have a conversation about, either because we've heard about it through public comment and it is something that has come to our attention, or it's something going on in the community that we feel that, the fourth piece of this, and Mr. Crabbill, I'd love your thoughts on this, is there's a certain bully pulpit, as they say, at the school committee. And by the school committee focusing on something and shining a spotlight on it, it may not be immediately in our purview, or it may not immediately fit a goal or a guardrail or be legally required, but it is still of value for us to talk about it at the school committee level. And so I'm interested in your thoughts about, the bully pulpit versus the legally required type work.
Yeah, so for example, I don't see anything in your, I don't see anything in your proposed guardrails as they currently exist. which after this conversation, I fully expect they might change, and that's healthy. That's a healthy part of the process. But I don't see anything in there about, defense of, our democracy. And so then when a insurrectionist behavior takes place at our Capitol, is there a space to describe that or to speak into that, at a school committee meeting? And you're correct, that means currently there is not. And so you all have to make the decision, do we want to speak on this kind of social, kind of emergent issue, even though it's not? Generally, my encouragement to you is don't. If there's a comment that needs to be made on behalf of the school system, superintendent is welcome to do so. But if you all feel the need to do so, then you are the public officials. You are the representative of the community's vision and values. And if you feel a need, to divert to something, then you all will do so. What I'm lifting up is the cost of you doing so. Is that in every moment you choose to take a little bit of energy away from the things that you have said are the most high priority vision and values of the community. Every time you take a moment away from that, then you make that a little bit harder to achieve. And so if you're going to take time away from that, my coaching would be to you, one, don't. But then second, if you are going to do so, be kind of really discriminating in that we're only going to take time away from this if it's actually, like, if this conversation is more important to us than than early literacy and the literacy of our English learners. If this is so crucial that we're comfortable taking time away from that, then my coaching is take time away from that. Like, make that judgment call and do it. But just don't do it, haphazardly. Do it with the full cognition that we consider taking an hour to spend on this particular topic more important than the predetermined priorities that we've already written down. And that's the rubric I would encourage you to use in your mind. And so if something meets that threshold, then absolutely add it to the agenda. If you've done your work well, most things simply won't meet that threshold, and so they won't be added. But if they do, then do so. Kamani? And then Kwok, I saw your hand next.
Me?
Kamani, and then after that, Kwok, I saw your hand.
Mr. Tran can go.
Oh, thank you, Kamani. I just have sort of two comments regarding this topic, or one comment and one question. Relating back to what we had discussed yesterday, that our role is more of governing rather than managing. Mm-hmm. And I take that to heart. So the delineation or the separation of duties and responsibilities are very clear. As a board member, or as board, as the whole board, we are governing. We're delegating the design and the construction of policy. We develop policies, we design policies, but then we delegate the implementation of those policies to the superintendent, and the superintendent is managing those implementation. Then we evaluate the superintendent. What I found in that model was that whether the implementation of those policies, so those ideas from the board, specifically, let's just pick one example: the the recent project on rebuilding the school system. I forget the term of it, but anyway, the superintendent is implementing the policies in accordance with our wish and our policy. And at the time of evaluation, usually we evaluated the superintendent based on the political powers that be, the community at large, input, and it's up to us to do that. But I believe that we are here first and foremost for the best interest of the students, not the parents, not the politicians, not the not the stakeholders, but the core group that we are responsible for is the students. So I usually focus my evaluation based on that, based on the work of the superintendent, on the effect of the students specifically, not the politicians, not even the parents sometimes, or not even the teachers, the staff. So that's my one point there. The delegation is very important to me. We are governing. We are not managing. So sometimes we want to jump into the issues that we hold dear. In my mind, I'm very interested in anything that is equity, in anything that is discrimination. But of course, I believe that we hire the superintendent, we delegate, and then we evaluate the person, the superintendent, based on our own set values and belief. So that's one thing. The second comment or the second question regarding the guardrails and all that, and issues that affect the board. I give you an example. A couple of months ago, there's a political issue. One of the chair had made something, and then had made some kind of remark, and then it became a political issue, and a number of politicians came on and spoke about it, and that incident alone does not have anything to do with the work of the school board, but just because of the effect of that incident, we spoke out, and then we as a group and as individuals, we spoke out. My 2 cents here is this: do we speak out as a whole, or do we speak out because of the image of the board? Do we speak out as in unity, or do we speak out in accordance with each and everyone's belief and experience and life skill? Does that have anything to do with guardrails? Does that have anything to do with with the goals and missions that we set out? I don't believe so, but we still speak out because it does have some effect on the image of the board. The question I have right there for you is, in anticipation, for lack of a better word, let's say there are other issues similar to that, with a tinge of politics that come before us. Let's say, like Joe Biden versus Trump, something like that, like you just mentioned, that come before the board, and we speak out. Do we speak out as in unity, or do we speak out in each and everyone's belief, despite the despite the image of the board as a whole?
Yeah. You brought up a few different issues. I want to try to answer kind of the two big ones. One, and this has to be super clear, nothing about this conversation in any way is speaking to the topics that community members can and can't speak about in public comment. Community members can speak about whatever they want. And I would not encourage you to make any efforts to try to limit or somehow harm what community members can talk about. Community members can say whatever they want to say, and that is pretty much a honored tradition all across the country.
AJ?
Yeah.
There are certain principles about what they can say, though, in terms of naming staff and disparaging and that kind of.
Yeah.
Right?
If
I mean,
you
there
all
are
have
ground rules.
yeah, if you all have, legal guidelines or policy guidelines, but what I'm saying is none of this conversation is suggesting that just because you don't have a goal or guardrail about pizza, that they're not allowed to come and talk about pizza. If they want to come and mention, hey folks, we need pepperoni on Mondays and sausage on Tuesdays, then they can come and have that conversation. That is not the intent of this conversation, is to in any way suggest or legislate how, what topics people want to talk about. As long as it is a legally policy appropriate conversation we're going to have, then they can come have it, even though it is far outside of your goals and guardrails. The only thing we're talking about here is what do you all choose to add to your agenda? Not, you still have an obligation to listen, but if they're talking about things that isn't your goals and isn't your guardrails, then they're probably really, in a practical matter, communicating with the superintendent, because then she's gonna own having to offer a response. Only if they're talking about something that's related to your goals and guardrails does it really elevate to, okay, well, hold on, this is something we as a school committee need to be paying attention to in terms of what we might ultimately add to our agenda. So that's one thing I just want to clarify. This is not an attempt to legislate. I would not coach you in that direction. But the other part is kind of this idea of speaking in one voice. And to that, I'll only say this. It's a matter of what you want to accomplish. If a purpose of making a public comment is to really strengthen a sense of community resolve and to inspire community in a direction that's consistent with the vision and values of the community as implemented by the school system, if the intention is to really be uplifting in your most powerful capacity, then for that as your intention, you are better off speaking with one voice in unity as an institution rather than individually, episodically as individuals. If your intention is to be beloved among your constituents, then it'd probably be a toss-up, but it probably is better for you to speak solo. So if you're trying to kind of raise your own stock price, speak solo. If you're trying to raise the stock of the school system as a whole, speak in unity. And so I think you just have to decide kind of in each given scenario, which of those am I most trying to accomplish? You all can make that assertion for yourself and then behave accordingly. Kamani, you still with us? I saw your hand up next. All right, we'll come back to him when he hops back on. So we're on this topic of influencing, of what is the influence of a school committee saying, here are our goals, here are our guardrails. So we're about to transition away from this and look at another piece of your operations. But before we do, any other, oh, there you are. Kamani, did you have a particular question? And then Alex, I see your hand as well.
Not a particular question. I just wanted to say that I appreciate the analogy you gave with the trucks and sort of, expressing how we need to be devoting our energy, sort of like decreasing our agenda items list and really devoting a lot of our energy into that. I 100% agree. I love how beautifully you put it. And I love that we're doing this. I think that sort of what I'm hearing and what I'm feeling is that there's a little bit of there's reluctancy, and there's reluctancy and there is fear in delegating because all of the work is so important. And you
it
know,
really
like,
is.
yeah, so I just wanted to acknowledge that. I think it's very tricky, and I think that, you know, we do have to revisit sort of our guardrails and goals to sort of see,
Yeah.
like, you know, what can be admitted and what can't be admitted. And I think
Yeah.
there also needs to be a stronger establishment of trust between the school committee and the district. So that way it's like, you know, if I am delegating this to you, I know that, you know, like there will be substantive, like progressive, like work on it without me having to be there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
Alex? Alex, and then I saw Brenda, your hand.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
And
AJ.
then Jerry.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say, I know it's a tough conversation and it's hard to decide where we're going to spend our time, but I guess what I would say is that I envision, you know, a place where, for example, like build BPS, although we would have to address that at some point, but that I would expect for the superintendent to do all the work that she can, all the upfronting, all of the engagement, all of the community meetings, and then bringing it to us when she feels like the community is there. Now, obviously, if she brings it, the community's not there, then we just delegate it back to her. I guess because I feel like I get nervous, like even looking at these goals, I think there's just too many. I feel like, you know, like I want to do like 2 or 3 things really well rather than doing a bunch of crappy things, which I feel like we constantly get stuck. And I know it's hard to think about like, oh, we're not going to cover this, we're not going to cover that. But I just feel like if we could do a few things, you know, we can really show some traction in those areas. I just think it would also make a really huge difference in how the community also sees us and relates, you know, to us being part of the school committee, because right now it's like we're trying to do so many things. So I just want to say that I can envision, again, many things delegated. It doesn't mean we're not going to know about it. The superintendent can bring it when it's like ready and we deal with it. But I think buildings are really, really important, and it's important that our students are in a wonderful facility because they deserve that. And at the same time, I don't know that as a board, as a body, we need to spend all that time on that ground level, looking at every building and trying to figure out, like, let the superintendent do that and then bring it to us.
Yeah, for those who, you know, curious, I think my inspiration on this, I think, comes from Stephen Covey's work. The Franklin Covey organization, they routinely do studies into leadership effectiveness. That probably isn't surprising. And in one such study, they were looking to see if any type of correlation existed between the number of goals that an organization had and the likelihood they would accomplish those. And if I recall, essentially what they found is if an organization had between 1 and 3 goals, they were likely to accomplish between 1 and 3 goals. If an organization had between 4 and 6, any guess how many they were likely to accomplish?
None. 1 to 3.
You know, one or two.
1 or 2.
If they had 7 to 11, any guesses how many they were likely to accomplish?
None.
None. The reality is it's an organization of humans. Like education is a relationship business. And if you burn those relationships trying to get people to run in 20 different directions, like you're not setting teachers and principals and counselors and everybody else up to do their best work. And so it's a people business, it's a relationship business, and you have to honor them. Part of honoring that is doing the hard work of setting and honoring priorities that reflect the most important vision and values of the community. Yeah, Brenda? And then Jerry, I saw your hand next.
I was just going to ask, and I don't mean to take us down a rabbit hole, but is it all or none? I wonder if they spend 80% of the board meeting on the goals and 20% on emerging concerns or new business or topics that are of interest to board members.
The board can do whatever they, I mean, the committee can do whatever they want. That's all. I mean, it's a, you know, it's a group of very intelligent. I've visited with all of you. You're very intelligent, very competent, remarkable and, decorated group of individuals. And if you all think something's important, you're going to focus on it. And my coaching to you is do so as long as you think it's a more valuable use of time than the things you've identified as priorities.
One other piece of that too, AJ, and that is, I think once you get the structures of the committee of the committees of the committee, that's another place for the community to lend their voice. So
we haven't come to that yet.
And when we
So-
get to that point, when you have the committees of the committee, I think that helps this larger body when they come together to focus on the student outcomes. And
In short, no. but we'll come to that in a second. We're going to take a quick break, and then we'll come back, and then we'll dive into task force subcommittee work. I saw Jerry's hand and then Michael's hand.
Yeah. No, I guess Mike, just thinking about this conversation again, it feels like we need to go back to the starting point and make sure everybody understands both the role of the school committee, what its responsibilities are, and what it will be focusing on and why moving forward, but also an issue of not only the greater public trusting the district and trusting that the district will really take care of all the concerns that they are bringing to them, but that we also have to trust the district. Because at times it feels like, public comment is the time when people come to say, you're not doing this, you're not doing that, why? Everybody feels bad. And you get distracted from where are we focused, because something is not going right if there are still all of these very great concerns going on. So how do we set up a structure whereby it's clear if I've got a concern about X, Y, or Z, whether I start out at my child's teacher or in the school or whatever, so that it really does get dealt with within the district. And that the issue of the reporting back of how these things have been taken care of are actually in the reports that get dealt with around the goals that we have set. So that it's sort of changing how the communication and what the expectations are on all the players.
And I'd lean into that even more and say, again, this is a perfect area where that makes perfect sense for the school committee to get that type of information and to be informed at that level and to understand what's going on. I'd say if those things are important, for example, if pizza is important, then get that information. The only discussion we're having right now is what is done at the school committee's meetings. And so if there are these other areas that, buildings or pizza or whatever, then still get that information and say, hey, Brenda, every other Friday, could you send us an update on this, in our email Friday night? And then we've got all weekend, we can read through it. And then when we have our regular, check-in with you, then we can talk through this. I never want the information you have access to as school committee members to decline. You are responsible for governance and oversight. And that means any information that you feel like you need to understand the operation of the school system, you should get access to. So this is not in any way suggesting a reduction of information you get. And so in all those areas, get that information. The only conversation we're having right now is which of those topics do we spend time on during committee meetings? And that's where I'd suggest, pick the things that you have to spend time on because they reflect the priority, vision, and values of the community. Do that in school committee meetings. And for everything else, get access to the information, have those conversations with your superintendent, but generally honor the delegation. And the one other thing I'd say on that is part of the reason that I'd want you to be very cautious about how you handle this, and this is kind of going back to Brenda's suggestion, the 80-20 idea. The part of the thing that I'd want you to be really careful about is that you do not become the conduit for inequity in your school system. Because what's going to happen is there are going to be very influential, constituencies who want you to focus on something. And so then you focus on that, with your 20, not the 80, but with the 20. Well, then another group shows up that isn't as influential, and then you don't spend time on that. Now we've got a situation where, okay, who is it who gets access to this, this extra sliver of time? Like how do we determine that? What is the process for determining, what we deviate away from the goals and guardrails, or who do we deviate away from the goals and guardrails from? Like if you're going to do that, I think you would want to determine that in advance, so this doesn't become those with privilege get access to the microphone, and those with less privilege are less apt to get it, are less able to insert additional things into the school committee's agenda. So that's the area that I'd want you to be very cautious about. That if you are going to do that, kind of the 80-20 idea, then I would just be really intentional about building a rubric around what are the conditions that make something eligible for the 20s, so that you don't accidentally find yourselves violating your core values unintentionally. I think Michael, your hand was up next.
Thank you. Yeah, 3 quick points. One, I want to reiterate that the focus on trying to do as much as possible on the goals and guardrails are legally required is an aspirational goal. Yeah. It does, quite frankly, take hard work and discipline to get there.
It takes a long time to get there. Usually 12 to 18 months for a board to actually get somewhere approaching that. Yes.
Yeah, and part of that is us going back and looking after the fact of, say on a quarter by quarter basis, how much did we actually spend? And by the way, if we ask the 7 of us, or excuse me, if we ask the 8 of us, of 9, including the superintendent, how much time we thought we each spent, even looking at the agendas, we would probably come up with 9 different estimates on how much time we spent on goals and guardrails and legally required. So that's my first point. The second point is, I think this heightens the importance of the superintendent's report part of the agenda, because many things that we're delegating to her can still be brought out in the superintendent's report, where she updates us, and we do have a chance to ask questions about that way. So some items are brought to the forefront on that. And the third thing is, and I think this is important, and Mr. Crabtree, you could give us some guidance on this, is how policy or potential policy changes get introduced to the equation. It's an age-old chicken and egg question, right? It's just as Ms. Robinson said, we often hear in public comment of people who don't like something or want us to do something that we're not doing. We also, quite frankly, often hear, wow, the first I heard about this was, it just came up at a school committee meeting and now you're about to vote on it. Mm-hmm. And, you kind of stop and you say, okay, that's a fair feedback, but where else did you want to hear from it? A letter home from the superintendent, read it in the Boston Globe, that type of thing. But I do know several districts, and for example, in Chicago, they have an ironclad rule that there's a 60-day window between when the superintendent proposes a policy change and when the board is going to consider it, so that they can get community input. Mm-hmm. The superintendent, as an example, the CEO of Chicago schools, as an example, was proposing the changes to how they were handling sex ed in their classrooms. Put it out for public comment. They get 30,000 public comments on it. But by the time it actually came to their board, the district had had a chance to get that public comment and react accordingly. And so, it's an age-old question. Does the superintendent start by proposing policy? Do we announce it ahead of time on a calendar? Do we build in a longer period for community feedback so people don't think, wow, I just heard about this and now you're about to vote on it? It's what we have been informally calling the Jerry Robinson rule, which is that on any major policy, we don't vote the immediate next meeting, but we wait at least 2 meetings. We should think about something like this as well.
Yeah, that is really important. And by the way, I kind of the ironclad recommendation I always offer is learn about it at one session, sleep, and then act on it at another session at a minimum. So that's kind of my general coaching for all things that the school committee is going to do. It's really suboptimal to learn about something and act on it without having a period of rest in between the two.
But we never, just so you know, Mr. Garbo, we never vote anything that came up at that first meeting. There's always a period of at least 1 or 2 committee meetings.
And that's what I'm saying. I think that is optimal. So for my, when I was chairing my board, the rule that we had in place was that major decisions, the superintendent had an obligation to go and meet with community, in public meetings called for that purpose, at least, I think it was 30 to 60 days prior to making a recommendation to us. And so we erred on the side of, we would rather you go talk to the community first and bring recommendations to us after it's already been, worked over through that. But other school committees have had a different approach. They've said, we want to hear about it first. And then after we hear about it, you can go to the community and then bring it back to us. And so I think that's something you all need to decide for yourself. Me personally, like I said, my choice, my board, we said, go communicate with the community. Don't even bring it to us unless that part has already happened. And so I think you could go either way. But to your point, I think what's really important is that the school committee makes a decision of which one of those ways you want to go, and then puts that in writing so that your superintendent knows what to rely on in terms of what that expectation is. Yeah, Brenda?
So thinking about policy, one thing that we really need is like a policy book, and to have our policies up and available publicly, transparent to our, we don't have that right now. And I know that Liz is working on getting that together so that we'll have that and that will be up. Then I'm wondering your thoughts on like a policy committee rather than them all coming, that there's a committee working with the board that regularly reviews policy, and there's dates for those to be updated and brought to the school committee on a regular basis.
Yeah.
That way, then, it's like a constant review of the policies. The one thing that I am worried about a little bit is that, like, in this pandemic, I have to bring policies because, the state makes a change to student learning time, or, we have a change because we weren't able to give exams, or we have, these conundrums that just come up that where a 60-day window is not feasible. So I think that, that's the tougher piece in emergency situations where you have to bring it up. But generally, I love the idea of a longer runway to work up. We did that with the exam school policy. The chair and I did that with the data privacy policy. We took a whole summer to engage with the community on that. I think that that's just the best approach, but there are times when you're in a pinch and you need to move it quicker.
Yeah, the idea of having a manual where the school committee really codifies its own operating procedures and how will we function as a team, and how will that delegation with the superintendent function, all that really in a high performing team would be in writing. And so that's one of the things I'll definitely support you on. As we're talking through these conversations, I'm getting more and more clarity on where you all as a team stand on those things. And we'll be supporting you in putting those on paper. On the issue of a policy committee, and then I want to catch whatever other hand I missed. I thought I saw another hand come up. But on the issue of a policy committee, and we'll talk about this after the break. What I would actually encourage contemplation of is, policy dieting. That really I would encourage the committee to focus in on creating governance level policies where that is legally required or related to your goals, related to your guardrails. And any other policymaking that is not legally required of the governing body? Is there a layer of administrative policy that the superintendent owns, so that certain administrative matters, simply don't ever actually come before the school committee? That if we need, if we need a procedure, for how attendance is collected, I would rather see that in an administrative procedure manual than in a governance policy manual. And so if it's an administrative procedure, is there an opportunity to have an administrative manual that is owned by the superintendent? So the board is focusing on policy level issues, not procedural level issues. And so that bifurcation, I don't know the extent to which that currently exists, but that's a conversation I would encourage you to contemplate, so that you as a school committee are focusing your time on the strategic more so than the tactical. But we'll talk about that a little bit more after the jump. I've got 35 after. We take another 10-minute break, come back at 45 after, and then finish out our work. That work for folks? All right.
Thank you.
See you 45 after.
Hey, Hardin, you're on live, just FYI. You want to mute yourself?
So I should not start using the language that's on the verge. Thank you.
All right, welcome back. We got a few more topics. And again, as we're talking, what I'm doing is trying to take notes and capture a lot of what you all are sharing in terms of how you want to see your school committee operate. And this is the beginning of what you heard Brenda describe as a potential, board operations manual that can really begin to codify what are the things that describe how you want to operate as a team, but also codify what are the things that you want to say to your superintendent in terms of delegation of authority to her. And so I'll be helping you all put pen to paper on those issues as we talk. And so another area, in addition to how you want to spend your time, which is in committee meetings, is how do you want to use additional subcommittees or task forces or things of that nature. And it probably won't surprise you. My coaching for you is to, for the school committee, to only spawn subcommittees, task forces, or anything else of that nature when it directly relates to work about your goals, your guardrails, or that's legally required. And that if it is outside of those, then my coaching to you would be to complete the work of delegation by allowing your superintendent to create whatever committee or task force is needed for that purpose. But if it's directly related to your goals, your guardrails, or a legal obligation of the school committee, then I would say have a subcommittee or a task force about it. But if you're going to do that, then here's the coaching I have for you. A few rules to follow when forming task forces and subcommittees and the like. 1, don't do it unless they have a specific deliverable that has been communicated to the leadership of the body in advance. Having task forces just for the sake of having task forces does not effective governance make. There should be a specific deliverable. This is the specific document. It's usually some type of written deliverable that you all are being called forth to create on behalf of the school committee, that you're helping the school committee do work. And once you've identified what the deliverable is, then identify the due date. And so if you don't have a specific deliverable and a specific date by when the deliverable is due, then I would say you have no business spawning a subcommittee or a task force, that you really want it to be focused on the work of the school committee, not focused on the superintendent's work. If she needs a committee or a task force to help her do her work, she is incredibly capable of spawning said entity. That really, when you're spawning committees and task forces and the like, that it is to help the school committee do its work, whether it's related to your goals, your guardrails, or legally required duties. And so if it's related to supporting the school committee and doing that, and you have identified a deliverable and you've identified a due date, then I'd say spawn away. So that is the coaching I offer. What questions, comments, reflections do you have? Lorna, take us away.
Again, I love your categories because they don't quite fit Boston in many cases. And I'll say because I co-chair the English Learners Task Force. And again, I defer to my members to talk about that history, but my understanding is that, there's a Department of Justice oversight. Right now, we have to monitor and have data for compliance issues around, again, serving English learners in the district.
So here's my question for you.
Yeah, I mean, there's the legal piece, right? But there's no the deliverable part is my question, but go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, so no, that was my question for you, is what is the deliverable?
Well, again, I'm just speaking as my observations. It was originally about monitoring and the data and making sure that the district was in compliance. But there's also within the district, right, there's an Office of English Learners that, you know, is ultimately responsible for the data compliance piece. You know, and so then, you know, the task force is sort of always, you know, there's like a balancing act there around requests for the data to ensure that there is the compliance. There's the, you know, the monitoring piece, that without the task force, I'm not so sure the district would be even, you know, in compliance. Again,
So
yeah.
let me get this straight. The courts have required you, or no, the Justice Department has required you to do this monitoring, but they don't require any report back on
Oh,
the
they
status?
do. They do, but then the report comes from the school district, right? It doesn't come from the task force, but, you know, the task force asks for the data, constantly asking for data to be disaggregated, and it isn't always forthcoming from the district. So there's been a history. I think it's changing now with, you know, Dr. Caselius has been, you know, great about, you know, having her staff there, but there's a history there as well with the task force sort of serving in an accountability mechanism or in a role of like trying to hold the school district accountable, but it's a task force of the school district. So it's a weird dynamic.
So then let me ask in a different way then. How do you know whether or not the school system is actually doing what it's supposed to be doing? Like, what is your standard of evidence that lets you know that what is supposed to be happening is happening?
Oh, you're asking me. I don't know. I'm being honest.
And when we create that, what I believe you'll find is that the task force is vastly more valuable to children. Is that when you have committees and task forces that have a tangible deliverable and tangible date by when, it forces you to think about, okay, how would we evidence this? You know, what evidence would we rely on to say, yes, we have either one, complied with this Justice Department, you know, mandate, or I think more inspiringly, we have actually honored one of the goals, because it sounds like you have a goal that speaks directly to this issue. And so it sounds like you may in fact have a task force that is derived both of legal obligations, but more importantly than legal obligation is derived of community values. And there's a value in the community that we expect to see the well-being of our English learners honored, and then there is growth in that area. But I would never encourage your community to just trust that there's growth because you say so. I would expect you to, as a community member, I'd expect you to produce evidence that allows me to rely on, okay, here's where I can see we started here, we went here, and your goals position you to be able to provide that evidence. And so it sounds like if this is something that you need to have for legal reasons, I would upgrade that with the moral authority of your goals that represent your community's values, and then make it a norm that the deliverable that we produce is a monitoring report that speaks to here is the extent to which we've actually accomplished the goal around the needs of our English learners, and produce that monitoring report maybe on a quarterly basis. In that moment, you've made more, you've upgraded the relevancy of this entity, because just my experience and having served as a statewide regulator, compliance often not as inspiring to people, but community vision often is. And so if you can actually merge the legal obligation with the community vision inherent in your goals, and then produce, you know, a regularly recurring monitoring report that speaks to either we're getting it done for our English learners or we're not, that I think that could actually simultaneously enhance the relevance of the entity as well as enhance the efficacy of having it all. Yeah.
I have a question. Would it be appropriate, so if we're adopting these goals, I agree that the task forces should be aligned with the goals. So would it be appropriate to do that now? So like when I think of the ELL task force, I feel like you guys have a lot of goals, which, you know, are very important, but how is it tied back to the school committee if we're adopting these?
Yeah, and I would go exactly what I heard you describe. If it is going to be an entity spawned by the school committee, you know, subcommittee, task force, whatever you call it. If it is an entity spawned by the school committee, the coaching that I'm offering you is that its work would be grounded in either legal requirement, goals, or guardrails, that it would have a clear deliverable and a clear deadline for that deliverable. And so if that's not currently the case with existing committees or task force that belong to the school committee, then I would try to enhance them, upgrade them the way that Lorna and I were describing. If, however, you find things that have nothing whatsoever to do with your goals and guardrails, then either one, I'd recommend you rethink your goals and guardrails, and maybe there's something that you missed there, or two, consider that maybe it is an entity that needs to exist, but it's an entity that the superintendent needs to own. It's an entity that she has created under her authority rather than you created under your authority. Michael?
So I would say every task force we've created has always fit those criteria, Mr. Grabil. They have a specific, they're for a specific reason, they have a specific ask, they have a deadline. What has happened though is over time, and they're often made up of a variety of experts in the community, and it can include students and teachers and parents and school leaders, outside experts, et cetera. Usually 1 or 2 school committee members at the most. What has happened though, and particularly when groups work hard on making recommendations, there is a nervousness about fidelity of implementation. And so they have often turned into then ongoing monitoring groups where they work with the district to track progress towards those goals. I think about the Opportunity Achievement Gap Task Force as an example. I think of the School Quality Framework Task Force. I think of ELL Task Force. And so that is how they continue to be in operation. And then they tend to report back to the school committee once or twice a year on what they are seeing, potential adjustments to the policy, et cetera. But they always start with that mandate.
Yeah. So the underlying question that you're getting at is, does this entity exist to support the committee in doing its work or to support the superintendent in doing her work? And what it sounds like you're saying is these entities actually exist to help her do her work.
No, not necessarily. I actually think it does help the school committee do our work around particular topics: inclusion, school quality framework, ELL, Opportunity Achievement Gap Task Force. What I am saying is over time, after they reach the initial mandate, they have turned more into monitoring,
right,
and tracking, which again is, work doing that on behalf of the school committee.
No, and I would argue that implementation is absolutely a managerial function, not a governance function.
I agree with that, but monitoring implementation.
Yeah, so I'd say monitoring
to look for fidelity against a policy.
Yeah, so I'd say monitoring implementation is absolutely, I would describe as a management function, not a governance. Monitoring, did we get the outcomes we want as a result of the implementation? I'd say that is definitely governance. Mm-hmm. And so if they're monitoring, is the school system creating the results that we intend? I'd say that is school committee work. If they're monitoring, did middle manager X complete this checklist? I would say that's management work.
And Dr. Rivera, I'd love your thoughts on this. I would think at least the ELL task force is very much focused now on monitoring outcomes.
Yeah, I mean, it's still both of that. Really, and it's when we're talking about monitoring, it's also, I use the word accountability because again, there's also like, you know, Mr. O'Neill said, there's stakeholders there that really, you know, raise issues that I'm sorry, if they hadn't raised, the previous superintendents would not even have addressed
Wouldn't
these.
even been known or addressed it, yeah.
So, you know, and so that there's you know, sometimes there is that tension there then about, you know, are you a part of the school committee and you just sort of, you know, just keep supporting, you know, all the goals, or are you also able to have some critical feedback there? And that's, or even advocacy, right? I mean, that's come up too, that, and especially for the EL task force, that, you know, I'm sorry, I'm being honest here, but, you know, it's too activist, right? Or, you know, I've heard those things. And so then those voices get marginalized too, because, you know, they're always just focused on the problems. But damn, the problems have gotten worse. They haven't improved since the Department of Justice, you know, consent decree. And so, you know, and it's still, so then it's like, is this even an effective task force then? If that even the monitoring and all of that is not really being.
Based on I don't know the facts on this, so I'm going on what I've heard from you all. Based on what I'm hearing from you all, these don't sound like governance entities. These sound like management entities. And the distinction that I make is, are they fundamentally involved in progress monitoring of the outcomes, or in project management of the inputs? And the way that you all are describing it, maybe we're just, you know, having a difference of understanding on this, but the way I hear you describing them, these sound like project management entities that are monitoring implementation and inputs, not progress monitoring entities that are looking at did the outcome show up. And part of one way you can know that is frequency of inspection. You can inspect a project, the inputs, daily. You cannot inspect progress daily. And so generally speaking, one way to differentiate is if you are inspecting it, you know, more often than a couple times a quarter, you're probably doing project management of inputs, not progress monitoring of outcomes, just because outcomes don't change frequently enough to be monitoring them. So for example, you all aren't going to look with the goals that you've described, you know, one of them is around, you know, science performance. You're not going to look at science performance every single month. At that point, you would be project managing, you know, the science curriculum. But the outcomes for students just aren't going to change quickly enough to give you meaningful data about that. Formative assessment occurs on that timeline, but formative assessment is inherently about project management, the management of instruction and improving the nature of instruction. Formative assessment is never intended to be about discerning progress toward outcomes. That's what interim assessment is for. And so the frequency of inspection gives you some insight into, are we doing project management, which is looking at inputs and interrogating the quality of implementation, or are we doing progress monitoring, which is looking at outcomes and really interrogating, did the system produce the results it wanted? But the frequency of inspection gives you some insight into which of those activities you're engaged in.
No, AJ, I would put on the table that
you muted yourself, Hardin.
Meeting. We're more in the gray area here, and so as someone who thinks that the task force really served us well, I want to take the other side for that and say that they, to some degree, exist for two reasons. One is a lack of trust in the district's integrity to address key and core issues. And given the structure of the way in which the school committee works, we've needed to delegate to a group of community combine community, staff, and committee people, the role of establishing what our expectations are in these particular areas, and it's not monthly, it's maybe quarterly, yearly, develop reports to ensure fidelity and that of implementation of our expectations. And that's how a lot of them work. So the School Quality Task Force spends a lot of time getting community input on what should be the ways in which we identify quality schools, and then how does that play into our school assignment system. And then we report back to the school committee on an annual basis that progress. And it's built to some degree in that we haven't always trusted the district to take on those roles with integrity. And that's why I say it's in the gray area. The challenge that you're putting before us is to say that really, let's make that monitoring of fidelity a managerial function that then would be tied into the reporting on goals. So if it's done with fidelity, we'll see the outcome and the goals. That's going to take us a lot of learning to let go and trust.
Let the grieving process begin. But no, I mean, the reality is, if this is, at the end of all things, we can all be pragmatist about this. If what you are currently doing is working to improve outcomes for students, like if it is at cause for why outcomes for students are improving, at the end of the day, probably keep it no matter what. So if you look at this English Learner Task Force, and your belief is that as a result of this task force existence, student outcomes are improving, and if this task force went away, student outcomes would decline. If that is what you would swear on a stack of Bibles, then I would say keep it, even if it violates everything else we've talked about here, because the end game is now, always has been, and only ever will be, what are we doing to better serve children? How are we improving student outcomes? So if it is accomplishing that, then ignore everything else and just do it anyway. What I'm hearing you all describe in no way sounds as if these are actually producing that level of result. Or more accurately, I don't know that you know what result they're producing. And so given that, I would then start to question, okay, if these are producing questionable results at best, are there strategies that we could deploy as a school committee that we have some reason to believe is actually going to better position us to produce results over time? Or are there some behavior changes we could engage in that would give us greater access to results? Kwok, what do you think?
Just a question relating to what Dr. Coleman just raised. We are governing, and the office of the superintendent is implementation and operation.
Uh-huh.
The suggestion that I heard, maybe I don't know whether it's correctly what I heard or not, but the suggestion that I heard is that in order to to escape from our direct involvement with the implementation of the operation, we as a board member could somehow form some sort of a monitoring or inspection group to monitor the outcome or the management of the operations. Is that what I heard correctly?
Yes. So yes, you actually get to the heart of it. I do in fact recommend that you put together a body whose function, whose central charge is to monitor progress relative to your goals and guardrails.
I have a question though.
Yeah.
given the fact that we are governing, forming a group that then have some sort of a role as monitoring and inspection of the process of the operation. Is that a conflict? It would not rise to a conflict of interest of our role as governing of the outcome rather than looking directly at the implementation?
Yeah, so
we are forming a group to inspect the operation. In another word, we take away from the office of the superintendent the duty, or we interfere with the duty of the office of the superintendent in operation in managing the operation. We
yes,
put a group to monitor them.
nailed
Is that right? Does that rise to a level of conflict in our governance?
You nailed exactly the issue that I'm trying to raise here, is that there should be a group that is explicitly charged with monitoring progress relative to your goals and relative to your guardrails. The name of that group is school committee. That's the group. You don't need an extraneous entity. That is literally your job, is to monitor progress relative to your goals and guardrails. So if it's monitoring that should be a school committee as a whole, not farmed out to a sub. You want the full committee involved in the conversation of, are we seeing improvements in what students know and are able to do? It sounds like you all have some other special obligations under law in some other areas. And so my coaching to you, is always follow the law on those things. If you have to have another entity to comply with some other legal mandate, then do so. But monitoring of your goals and guardrails is a sacred duty that should be assigned to the school committee. I would not encourage you to sub-assign that to another group. I would want you all to be the experts on, is the community's vision coming to pass? Are the community's values being honored? And then if there are other things outside of that that are legally required in nature, then yeah, maybe you do have to spawn another entity for that. What I would caution you from, which is exactly what you just said, Clark, what I would caution you from is, as a school committee, engaging yourself in anything that looks or feels like project management. And I would also caution you from impaneling a group that does project management on your behalf, largely because the main reason I don't think you want to be doing project management is because you want the superintendent to be incentivized to make whatever operational changes are necessary to get the job done. And the way that you will unintentionally nudge a chief executive is if you are monitoring their project level implementation, then you are putting a nudge on them to continue the current projects that they're implementing, even if those have, for whatever reason, ceased to be fully aligned with creating the outcomes you want. You actually want your chief executive to be able to change up the tactics and, to a certain level, the strategies on the fly to match the needs of students, not try to force the needs of students to fit the buckets that were previously designed. And so my concern is when the board gets involved in project management, not progress monitoring, when the board gets involved in project management, you create this invisible incentive to sustain the projects, even if they fall out of alignment with the needs of students. That's the concern that I would offer. The way you worded it is kind of spot on, that it creates this conflict. But if you're looking for, how I would word it, that's the issue that I would surface. But I think fundamentally we're saying the same thing on that. Other thoughts on this? Anybody we haven't heard from? Kamani, I don't think we've heard from you on this topic. Jerry, I don't think we've heard from you on this topic.
Yeah, I'm in a similar situation that Lorna is in, that I am the one of the co-chairs of the Opportunity and Achievement Gaps Task Force. And our goal, our mission was, we updated several years ago the policy, and that was our outcome. But then the goal was that we would turn into a monitoring body to make sure that the policy was actually implemented, because we were coming back after 10 years after the original policy had been written and had been put on a shelf, and very little had happened with it.
So this
And
goes
so-
back to the trust issue that Harvey
Right.
raised.
So, and so now we are in the midst of changing leadership, having seen the OAG work become a stronger department within BPS, and at a moment of changing leadership, finding a new leader, but at the same time, trying to make sure that departments are actually implementing. So we've gone through one round of looking at the goals, and now going back to see, well, did they actually implement the goals, or why not, or where there was progress and where there was not. So we are, we're sort of, somewhere between the progress monitoring, and I would really feel that the staff of the Achievement Gap office is doing the project management, but we are that backup group to push to make sure it continues to happen.
Yeah.
Yes, so it's
and
another
I know
hard
this,
one.
and I don't say this, just
Yeah.
kind of whimsically,
No.
but if your intention is to get rid of Brenda sometime in the next year, then you'll probably need to keep the system you have for continuity's sake. If your intention is to keep her around for a little bit longer than that, you might consider, does it make sense to, because it sounds like this was developed in response to a lack of trust in a prior administration. And so you might consider, do you want to try giving responsibility of this to your current administrator? I guess operationally, I worry about, I just worry about her ability to lead something that really is being proactively led by a body of the committee. And so that's my questioning, is that if I was a member of this committee, I'd be doing just a little bit of soul searching to figure out, do we want to try to kind of make whole the administrative function by pushing project management duties back to the administration and retaining progress monitoring duties with the committee where they belong, or do we retain kind of that uncertainty and that unreadiness to transition back? And if that uncertainty still exists, then I would probably keep the entities, but I would just do some soul searching on kind of, is there a way to get past that? Because I just worry what that means for your superintendent. I saw Michael's hand and then Brenda's hand. Or
I just want to say, let's make sure we're very clear. We're only 2 years into what we expect is going to be a 13-year tenure of superintendent. So let's start up with let's make sure we have that in mind.
Yeah.
That's kind of what I was expecting.
Right.
Brenda,
But
you want to
the problem
confirm?
for us was that we had 4 superintendents over the beginning life of this
Oh, yeah.
project, and the fear was, if we didn't have the task force,
Yeah.
because there were so many things going
There's
on,
just no continuity.
the work
The
would not have gone anywhere.
The task force was the continuity mechanism.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Brenda?
Yeah, I think, when I went and I talked to and held all of the community meetings, this was the number one thing people talked about, was the lack of trust.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think I've ever been anywhere in any of my 3 decades of education where there's been a strategic plan that actually calls out cultivate trust and amplify voice, right? I mean, it's there because the community wanted it there. And I mean, I think that's the hard part of now having these structures in place, because I think having these structures in place do actually contribute to the mistrust, and it carries forward a history of it and an expectation that you're not going
An
to
assumption.
an assumption that you're not going to be good on your word, that you're not going to do what you're told, that you're not going to follow through. And that has been the hardest thing for me as the leader of this organization, because that's something that I don't think I'm anything if I'm not a person of my word. I don't make fuzzy promises, right? And so I get back to people right away because everybody's voice matters. But that's been the hardest thing in Boston as I've come. And I talked to Mr. O'Neill about this, and he said, Boston can be a tough place, you know? And when I was on the interview, people
I get a t-shirt with that.
people said, even the chair and others have said, you know, when you come here, there is this trust thing that you have to build. And they asked me questions about the principles, and I was like, I don't understand your question. You know, why wouldn't I have that? So I think that there's, and a lot of it is also because of our communication, both internally and externally. And sometimes we step on our feet with that. And so we've been really trying to be cognizant of that as we involve people in decision making and how we communicate. We're still not getting it completely right, and I own that. And so, you know, this is something that is a huge priority for us.
So my coaching to you all, based on the details that you've now offered, to bring me up to speed on this issue. So my first piece of coaching is, it sounds like these entities have to exist. Even if there was not a legal mandate, it sounds like just for community, you know, rationale, these have to continue to exist. And so my first piece of coaching is I wouldn't be thinking about the dismantling of them. I would, however, stand by what I've suggested earlier, is that it sounds like either these need to be retooled to be clearly governance, not the kind of gray that Hardin describes, but clearly governance, or they need to be retooled to be clearly management, and then create a long runway for transitioning back to your manager. I wouldn't do that immediately. I wouldn't do any cold turkey. I wouldn't, you know, do any knee-jerk stuff. I would be intentional about engaging with the community, particularly the folks who've been involved in the work. You honor the people who've been involved in the work, but in creating a runway and say, hey, this is really managerial work. We expect our superintendent to be with us she's been here 2 years, so she's got 13 years left on her contract. We really want to set her up for success to the greatest extent possible, which means she needs to really own this work. But we also recognize that there's, you know, community unreadiness. And so let's come together and design what is our process for transitioning this work back. And I'd create a runway. It would be a long runway. It would not be a short runway. You know, this is a large plane you're trying to lift off the ground, not a helicopter. But I feel strongly, if you plan to keep your superintendent for more than a year, you probably want to do some soul searching about how you design these in such a way that you all stay focused on, are the results actually happening for students, and let her get focused on quality of implementation issues. Alex?
No, I was just going to say, I completely agree with you. I think we need to relook at our task forces. I get concerned because, you know, I've been on a couple of task forces, and I think we want to be able to hear from the community, you know, what are those challenges? What are those gaping holes that maybe we don't see? But it has at times become really adversarial. And I don't think that's the intention of the task forces. So I think being really clear on what is the role of the task force in terms of like the governance versus the project, which I've seen on some of these task forces where the task force members are getting really in deep with staff. And I don't think that is the role. So I agree with you.
Well, and again, if it's a task force that she owns, then it's entirely appropriate for them to be engaged at that level, because at that point it is an operational kind of
And that would be a working group, because it's only a task force formed by the school committee. So if the superintendent has her working group, then that's she's, you know, about to launch one right now on the recent policy we passed around student sharing information. And that is under her purview, but the task forces would be school committee. But I do think just having better, you know, onboarding of task force members, what is the role, you know, that the task force plays, and just having it be very transparent and because I was a task force member on a couple of things and I never received anything that said, you know, this is what it is, this is, you know, what it's all about. So I feel like we need to do a better job on that. So I could not agree more. And I say that because I think it makes it really challenging, you know, for the superintendent to do her job when people are getting really into the weeds. I don't think, you know, my role as a school committee member is not to tell the superintendent who to hire, who to fire, you know, what is the strategy. I think she comes to us with, you know, either she's done it or she hasn't. If she hasn't, then she needs to go back, you know, and try a different strategy.
Other reflections on this? Have we heard from you on this one? I just want to make sure we haven't overlooked anyone in this conversation yet.
No, it's fine. Quite honestly, I wasn't here yesterday. And I'm like trying to soak up as much information as I can and like kind of like catch up. And I don't want to like, I feel like I feel like I had so many questions, but I feel like if I ask, it's like, oh, we already talked about that. And like, I hate being that type of person. I guess, you know, sort of going back, I really like what you said about making sure that the task forces that school committee sort of implements are also following the goals and the guardrails. Personally, I've only been ever able, since I started my term back in September, I've only ever been able to see one task force in action. And I wasn't even there for the very beginning of it, but the exam schools task force. And I thought that it brought forward an amazing policy and really changed sort of the direction of where the city was in terms of just like standardized testing. And I feel like it set a very nice precedent. So I think, you know, from what I saw, like that was my first impression of task force. So from what I saw, I think that they're highly effective. I think that the intention behind them is effective, and I think that they actually do really great work. And I think that if we were to align them with the goals and the guardrails of what school committee signed on to, I think that that could even be more effective.
Hey, Kamani, don't forget you served on the data privacy task force.
Oh,
Working group. Working group.
Oh, okay.
And the exam schools was a working group also.
Yeah.
It is now becoming a task force.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
My apologies.
Okay, you have.
What happened?
You have working groups that become task forces?
Yeah, that's what I get confused sometimes with that. I never really know.
So I haven't been around long enough. Maybe the vice chair knows. I just know in this round, we had a working group on the exam schools because of COVID and trying to figure out what that would look like. And from all the public testimony that we heard, people asked for it to be, the community asked if it could be a task force, because then it's has to be open meeting law, under open meeting law, so that people felt that it wasn't transparent and all that. So we heard the community, and that's why we made it the task force. I don't know if other working groups have become task forces. I have no idea.
Are you disallowed from having a working group operate consistent with the norms of open meetings laws? Like if you wanted to have a working group that, you know, conduct itself
no, I mean,
with...
I'll let the vice chair will know more than I do. He's been around longer, but I think I think the working group can be open and transparent. I don't think that's an issue. I think that people feel like because it is under a law, you know, a task force has to, then they feel like they're hearing everything.
We're going back to the trust conversation.
Yeah, exactly.
Gotcha.
I would say that the exam task force was constructed, AJ, exactly like you're recommending it. A specific time limit goal. It was do X, Y, and Z and report out, and it was assumed to stop. Then the question became, there's more we want to do. We want to delegate this group to do more, and we've given them a task, but we've asked them to operate in open rules. I don't know if it's time limited. The other task force we're talking about actually act as if they could last forever. There's no time limit. There's annual reporting, but no final goal, final report.
No deliverable.
I would say that it's
deliverables, but it's in the annual report. There's certain things they got to do each year, but they don't necessarily sunset once that report's done.
And I would suggest that they're not really task forces, they're really standing committees of the committee, right? So they're ongoing standing. I would suggest that a task force is time bound to a particular charge, whereas the committees that are OAG, the OAG committee, the ELL committee, those aren't really task forces. Those are really standing committees of the committee.
That would be a great way to redefine that.
Yeah,
We'd have to
I
change
agree
the
with that. Yeah, I really agree with that because I don't imagine the EL task force, if they, our outcomes improved for English learners and we are no longer under DOJ, oversight. I think the committee, I have to say, and thanks Mr. James for saying that, like the members on these task force, at least I'll speak for the EL one, are outstanding, like individuals with qualifications that are really assets for our school district. But at the same time, there's also the lawyers that attend, and like, are all there's, put class action and things like that. So it's really a mix. And so, I still see the value of having the EL task force, or if it changes as a committee, fine. But I think, again, I want to just elevate that they do really important work that we as school committee members, we don't have that, maybe that skill set or that expertise, that knowledge. So they really bring value to our work.
Yeah.
So yeah, I just wanted to put that out
They
there.
sound valuable. And so I just want to clarify, nothing I have said should be construed to suggest they're not valuable. Now, the only thing I'm trying to clarify is, are they adding managerial value or governance value? That's the only distinction that I'm trying to tease out from all the conversation. So I've taken a number of notes on this. I feel like I have the information I need to try to write this up and offer some clarity as we're thinking through what is a written operations manual for you all. And Kimani, my commitment to you is I'll reach out and we can find some time to connect, just you and I, and catch you up on what we talked about yesterday. So never hesitate to jump in and ask questions regardless, but I definitely heard that desire to be up to speed, so I'll make sure we get that done. So far we've talked about goals and guardrails, and we kind of try to define them a little bit. And then we started talking about how you would actually use them to change the behavior of the school committee. As it relates to how you spend time and how you deploy and kind of sub-delegate work to entities that aren't the superintendent. And this has been very, very informative, very, very interesting conversation. One more slice of this I want to dig into, but we may not have time. What time do we need to shut this thing down, Madam Chair?
Let me check and I will let you know in 1 second.
But one other area worth nudging on this is if the work of the school committee begins to orbit around the goals and guardrails, what impact does that have on what should that say, or what impact should that have on how committee members interact with each other, or what type of commitments you make to each other? Because one other area that we talked about the structures of the system, but we haven't really talked about the norms of the committee itself. And so as you think, hey, our work is to represent the vision and values of the community, and that lives through the vision that we've codified as goals and the values that we've codified as the guardrails. But what we haven't really talked about, what are some of the norms then that you all need to have in place to really solidify that focus on the vision and values? 1 second, Alex.
We can wrap up we have 2 speakers, so we can wrap up at 7:50.
Okay, so we got just a few more minutes. So then I want to push that out to you all. As you think about what are some of the norms that we need to have as we interact and engage with each other as committee members, that would help us stay focused on the goals and guardrails. So any thoughts? The floor is open. What do you think of when you think of norms that the committee really needs to have and honor, whether they currently exist or whether they're new norms that need to be crafted that would really help bend the work of the committee toward a focus on its goals and guardrails? What might some of those norms look like?
I think anything that is outside of our goals that we would want to know about, that we would ask the superintendent offline and not spend time at our meeting.
Okay, so one potential norm is if it's directly related to goals and guardrails, bring it up at the meeting, any meeting, go for it. But if it's outside of that, maybe a norm is email that to the superintendent. Got it, okay. Great example. What are other norms that might emerge that would make sense for you all to honor as a team? That help you be more focused as a team on accomplishing the vision of the community, the goals, while honoring the values of the community, the guardrails. What other norms might that encourage or imply?
I was thinking one would be about being prepared.
Yeah,
Being
preparation.
prepared, and I think this also goes back to the district, so that originally we were always told that we would get completed materials the Friday before the meeting, so that you would have the weekend to review and go back for questions to the district, whether the superintendent or others, prior to the meeting. But sometimes we get, changes multiple times, and
How far in
sometimes we don't
advance?
get materials until the afternoon of the meeting. So
How
the
far in
question
advance
is,
do you
how
need
can I
it?
be prepared, right?
How far in advance of a meeting do you need materials?
I would say at least 2 or 3 days, enough time so that you could actually read, digest it, and if you have any questions that you want clarified prior to the school committee meeting, that the district would have a chance to respond, so that, again, we're not utilizing the time in the meeting to ask those basic things or get clarification.
Jerry, I'll actually respectfully point out that it calls for in our bylaws that materials will be to be distributed the Friday before, and it is only the chair who can provide an exception to that rule.
Well, now that we are also translating the materials, we have to have them a lot earlier.
Yeah.
So what?
We have to
so
have
what's-
them available now.
So what's the practice right now? How many days prior to the?
Friday. But there are sometimes changes.
I would argue that I actually, as a student, I actually think that they should be given at least a week prior, because I get them Fridays, and like by Fridays I'm sort of like burned out, and then the weekends I'm like running errands with family, and then Monday comes back around and I'm thrown into BSAC, I'm thrown back into school and yada yada yada, and sometimes I don't end up getting to the materials until I'm lucky if I get to it Monday night, but like Tuesday night. So I don't know I know Michael O'Neill stated the bylaws. I don't know if that's it can only happen Friday or it must happen by Friday. And furthermore, I don't know if it's possible for them to be given at least a day or two earlier.
Can I suggest one? If we know the agenda, if we get the agenda in order, if that becomes a norm and we have all of our agendas out, then the team can prepare. Sometimes we don't know the agenda soon enough for the whole team to prepare, and then to get it to translation, and then to get it, so I think the first norm that we need is agenda set for the year. And
Yes.
that's getting really tight on what we're going to focus on, right? Which is the business of the past 2 days. And so if we know we're going to focus on those items, let's agenda them out, and we have them, and then now the team can work toward those. If it's a quarterly report, we know it's a quarterly report, we can have it available and we can get it out earlier.
One thing that I know several boards have instituted, Brenda, you may just want to close your ears for this part because you're probably not going to like it. One thing I know a number of boards have instituted is basically saying, here is the date by when all materials have to be to the board. And so if the board meeting is here, by this date, all materials have to be to the board And anything that's not to the board is not happening at this meeting. And if there are any changes, that automatically moves it off of this meeting into next month's meeting. And so this is the drop dead date by when the board must have all presentations, contracts, whatever they need to make a decision on the items at this meeting, they need to have it by this date. And anything that isn't this gets bumped to the next month, and anything that changes in this time period automatically causes it to be bumped to the next month. And generally speaking, this date is normally 7 to 14 days before this date.
So
that
AJ,
is
I like a deadline. However, let me just say, with the pandemic, that has shifted a little bit of the.
Oh yeah, work from home makes everything a little bit more awkward.
But I'm talking in normal business. This
Yeah.
is absolutely give a deadline like that. I would appreciate that actually, and I think the team would.
Yeah, and then you can plan everything out around that. You know, you could have the exact, because then what your chief of staff would do is they would say, okay, this is the date by which it has to go to the board. So the latest date that it can get, that staff can submit items is this date. And then we do, and you back it all up. And what you wind up doing, Brenda, just for your edification, as a practical matter, your chief of staff needs to have everything, really the process for you starts about 21 days prior to the board meeting. To get things in the pipeline, and then the board gets it X days in advance. In fact, I know a number of boards, Kamani, you'll like this one, because I think it'll honor what you were, the needs you're describing. A number of boards have gone to a system where they get it that far in advance, and then they have like 2 or 3 days to submit questions to the superintendent. Everybody submits all the questions. They don't get any answers. They just all submit the questions. And then after that period's up, then the superintendent sends answers to all the questions out to everybody. And then at that point, you have an opportunity to pull items off of consent or leave it on consent. And then the meeting is posted, and that's it. There is no pulling stuff off of consent at the meeting. At that point, the agenda is chiseled into stone. And the benefit of that is it lets the administration know exactly which issues are going to be debated and which issues aren't going to be debated. So that way they can be prepared with a deep dive on the ones that won't be. But then because they don't have to spend their time getting a deep dive prepared for the ones that won't be, and they can spend all their time getting a deep dive on the items that will be debated. Kamani, what are you thinking?
That idea sounds really interesting. My question is, okay, so you said a 2-day period to submit questions, and then after all the questions are submitted, the superintendent and her team responds to all those questions. Would she respond via email, like back to it individually?
No, probably just, type it up in a doc and email it out to everybody. Yeah.
Okay, so my only sort of suggestion or point is that I feel as though there are certain answers to certain questions that need to be made public. So the public sort of understands this is what's going on, or this is the answer to this question. I can't figure out an example right now, but I do believe wholeheartedly that there are certain questions with certain answers that should be made public. So if we were to adopt this type of process, is it possible to sort of give a summary to the public, this is what was on this agenda item, this is what was asked, not going through all of it, but these were the highlights.
Actually, in the school system to do this, that document that the superintendent prepares with the questions and answers gets appended to the agenda so anybody in the public can look at it.
Oh, okay.
And the reason school systems do this is then there's less need to pull things off of the consent agenda. And so the vast majority of things wind up being resolved on the consent agenda, and that saves the school committee time to really do a deep dive in public on the things that require a deep dive in public. Because all of the things that just needed a simple kind of, wait a minute, this toilet paper contract, is this 1-ply or 2-ply? Oh, 2-ply? Yeah, leave that on consent agenda, we're good. And then you move on, and you don't have to spend time during the school committee meeting on it. But then it's also more transparent because then all the questions have been asked and are made public, and all the answers have been provided and have been made public. Save time, be more transparent. What's not to love? So these are just some ideas about norms. We'll dig into this much more. What I'll probably do is I'll get with your board officers and superintendent and just talk through some of the next steps. What I suspect the next steps are is that based on this, you all are going to have another conversation about your goals and guardrails. So now that you have an idea of kind of what they would mean to adopt them, that should give you some much stronger insights into, okay, do we have the right ones? If not, what modifications do we need to make? So the next step for you all is that. I think the next step for, and we just need to schedule some time for that. And I can try to be available for that if you want me. If you all just want to have that conversation among yourselves, that'll work. A definite next step for me is, now that we've had some conversation about what are some of the changes in how you agendize your work, changes in how you delegate your work, whether to task force, committees, so on and so forth, or do it yourself or delegate to the superintendent. And then conversations about how you all work together as a team. Now that we've talked through some of that, what I want to do is a follow-up and start to visit with each of you and get a sense of some of your ideas in these areas, so that I can work up some type of draft of edits for operating procedures that you all could use at the time that you proceed with adoption of goals and guardrails, so that you can adopt those at whatever point in the future you do so, and already have some planned revisions for how you all operate that match and really work well with those adopted goals and guardrails. So those are the next steps I'm saying. In addition, another next step is that I'll help you all put together a script that you all can use to start having more conversations with your community. This is both corresponds with, but is also entirely separate and apart from this conversation about goals and guardrails, and that you should just be having regular conversations with your community anyway, just as a way of staying connected, staying in relationship with your community. And so one of the next steps I'm also working on is I'll draft a script, a kind of a community engagement script that you might use to help you have conversations that lead in the direction of governance rather than lean in the direction of management. And so I'm working on that. That's another deliverable for me that I'll put together and provide back to you all. But with the idea that eventually you all will just make a regular habit, like it'll literally just be on your calendar. In September, we go out and have these conversations with the community. In March, we go out and have these conversations with the community. It's just a normal part that you don't leave your community wanting and waiting to try to communicate with you, but you are proactively going to them to really have these important governance related conversations. So those are the next steps. Any questions or comments before I hand the baton back to your board chair? Any other questions or comments? Well, as is always the case. Yes, Jerry?
I said, thank you. It's a lot. It's a lot to think and rethink
Yeah.
and reprocess, but thank you. Yes.
No, you all are a very fun, very cerebral group, a very fun group to work with. And so it is my pleasure to be of service in whatever way I can be. Madam Chair, back to you.
Thank you so much. We're now going to move into general public comment. Ms. Sullivan.
Thank you, Ms. Oliver Davila. Let me just bring up my script. One moment, please. The public comment period is an opportunity for parents, students, and other concerned parties to make brief presentations to the school committee on pertinent school issues. Questions on specific school matters are not answered at this time, but are referred to the superintendent for a later response. Questions on specific policy matters are not answered at this time, but may be the subject of later discussion by the committee. We have 4 speakers signed up this evening, and I only see 2 of them in attendance. So please raise your hand virtually in Zoom when I call your name, so we make sure that we can call on you. Each person will have 3 minutes to speak, and I'll remind you when you have 30 seconds remaining. Those who require interpretation services will receive additional 2 minutes per person. To the attendees who are listening to simultaneous interpretation on a different Zoom channel, please move over to the English language channel when the public testimony is being translated from a non-English language. Speakers may not reassign their time to others. Large groups addressing the same topic are encouraged to consolidate their remarks or choose a spokesperson to provide testimony. Written testimony is appreciated and encouraged. Please state your name, affiliation, and what neighborhood you are from before you begin. When I call your name, please raise your hand virtually in Zoom, and please make sure you're signed into Zoom with the same name that you used to sign up for public comment. We'll begin this evening with Sharon Hinton, and she'll be followed by John Mudd.
Good evening. My name is Sharon Hinton. I'm an educator and a community activist, and I'm from Hyde Park, or from people with the Boston accent, Hyde Park. This is really wonderful. I'm glad that I watched and listened to the amazing work that you guys are doing. I think it was a lot. I admire you. I am hoping to join you because I have notified the Boston School Committee nominating panel that I'm still in the running to be able to join you. I'm just amazed, and the superintendent, you guys have a lot on your plate. And I have expressed what I think would be a great addition. And one of them was about the meetings and actually magnifying and better utilizing the school committee meetings. So you guys really took that on and working together as a team. So I don't have 3 minutes to say, and I'm so used to just doing 2 minutes. I just congratulate you guys. You're doing amazing work, and I hope to join you. God bless.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hinton. Our next speaker is John Mudd.
Did I unmute?
Welcome.
Great, thank you. There's an awful lot to absorb from the last 8 hours of discussion, but I think the exercise has been extremely valuable in helping all of us focus on outcomes and selected priorities. But as you could predict, I think that elimination of achievement gaps would be the most important combined priority for you and the district. I am concerned that if I understand what's happened, you removed the achievement gap from your goals, and you just left it in the guardrails. In other words, as a process variable. I think that would be a mistake. I don't think you should highlight selected marginalized groups. The Opportunity and Achievement Gap Task Force and policy, that superintendent's vision of 2025 identified the relevant marginalized groups: Blacks, Latinos, English learners, special education, and now English learners with disabilities. All of these groups should be the focus of attention in eliminating achievement gaps. I think parenthetically, some of us noted that in the discussion, no one seemed to explicitly mention Blacks. My major concern, however, is that the committee has spent many, many hours focusing on a definition of priorities. I think all of us know that we've agreed for many years that priorities are some mixture of eliminating achievement gaps, racial and linguistic diversity of staff, culturally and linguistically sustaining curriculum, authentic engagement of families, students, and community. To me, that's not the problem. The problem has been and continues to be implementation. That should be the focus of the committee's attention in the future. And I was very interested to see, the discussion of how you organize yourself to get the information that's necessary and identify problems and hold people accountable on this. I would say that if you go to the community, it's going to be important to try and figure out how does this work that you're doing now relate to all the other plans we have seen. I mean, I take seriously the Vision 2025, which everybody, the superintendent and you put a lot of work into. There was a strategic operational plan which started but never got completed. Under the superintendent's evaluation, there'll be plans for OEL, plans for special education. And then I think there's something else that I've read about. It seems to be called something like Return, Recover, and Reimagine. So I don't know how they all interrelate. Finally, for 2 seconds, I am a member of the English Learners Task Force. And I think the one thing you didn't hear and was part of the original guidelines for that task force was policy guidance. You know, we talked about currently access to native language. We highlighted English learners with
Hey,
disabilities.
Mr. Med,
Thank you.
your
I'm
time
finished.
is up. Go ahead.
I got it.
Thank
Go
you,
ahead,
Mr. Met.
finish. Okay, you're done. Sorry to interrupt you. I just wanted to let you know you had a, I know you always have really insightful things to say. So thank you so much again. Thank you to our speakers. So this concludes our business for
I'm
this.
sorry, Ms. Oliver Dowell, I'm sorry to interrupt, but we do have another speaker who's just joined us in attendance who signed up previously, Rachel Meiselman.
Okay.
Ms. Meiselman? Rachel Meiselman?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, good. Oh my goodness. All right. All right. So my name is Rachel Meiselman. I am a member of the Boston Parents Coalition for Academic Excellence. And I would like to thank the Boston School Committee and Superintendent Casilius for this opportunity to speak. As I have previously shared, I'm a second-generation exam school alumna. I hail from the zip code 02132 and 02124, but it is the former zip code about which I will speak tonight. On the Boston Public Schools website, the BPS Exam Schools admission slideshow can be found. On the 9th slide, it is stated, we expect that students in the top 50% of each zip code will have access to Boston Latin School. Bearing this in mind, let us look at last year. In 2020, West Roxbury, which has the zip code of 02132, earned 133 invitations to all 3 of the exam schools. However, for this year, according to the projections of the Boston Parents Coalition, this zip code 02132 will only receive 40 invites for the 3 schools. This represents a 70% reduction from last year. According to further BPCAE projections, this zip code will get a mere 16 invitations from Boston Latin School this year, which is a sharp drop from 88 invitations last year. This stands as an 82% reduction. Hence, under this new zip code quota system, far fewer than 50% of the top students in West Roxbury will have access to BLS. I will leave you with this request. In science and math classes, students often hear, show your work. Understanding the full weight of these words, I will ask the Boston School Committee, show us your work on the zip code quota for the 3 exam schools. A change to the admission process of these schools has far-reaching consequences and implications. So it demands an analysis and a discussion that are both thorough and transparent. I would also like to throw in, and this is something more on a personal note, not as a member of this particular group. After listening to the entirety of this meeting, I have to say, regarding the instruction for those that do not speak English as a first language, I am rather shocked and disappointed that there has not been more emphasis on learning how to write properly. I have been teaching students who do not speak English as a first language for over 12 years.
Hey, Ms. Meiselman, your time is up. If you could please wrap up.
Thank you, ma'am. And there are 4 components: speaking, listening, writing, and reading. And I don't think it's appropriate to kind of shoehorn any kind of instruction on writing under the umbrella of reading comprehension. Thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you very much. This concludes our business for this retreat, and I really want to thank all of my colleagues tonight, the superintendent and staff that are here, as well as members of the public, and thank Mr. Crabble for spending 2 nights with us and just carving out this time for us. Again, as I said yesterday, there's a lot of great work happening in our district, and I think these conversations are going to help us to be a stronger, more effective governing board. And there's a lot of work ahead of us, as we heard tonight, and some tasks coming up. So we look forward to receiving feedback on this. We're going to have some community stakeholder listening sessions in February, and we will post those dates soon on the school committee's webpage. The next school committee meeting is going to take place on Wednesday, January 27th at 5 p.m. on Zoom. And if there is nothing further, I would like to entertain a motion to adjourn.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I just want to thank you for your leadership in having these retreats. I think they've been super helpful. The first 2 were very helpful as well. And they've just really helped us to focus. I also want to thank the Vice Chair for helping us secure AJ and his services from the Council of Great City Schools, and reminding the public that these services did come as part of our partnership with the Council for Great City Schools, and just very thankful to Mr. O'Neill for his work there. And then all the members and this is a lot of time for you all to give. So just really thankful to all of you. And Kamani, I know you have a lot of homework, so thank you for coming this evening as well. If you need a pass tomorrow, let me know. I'll be glad to get it for you. And then, at our first meeting, one of the things I said to you, Madam Chair, was I wish more of the public would have seen that Saturday meeting that we had where we did the visioning with the visual note taker, as well as these 2 evenings that we've had here. And I really do thank our regular attenders who commented tonight and who also were there in the audience. And I hope that they will share at the Equity Roundtable tomorrow some of their reflections. I think I'm going to ask Dr. Granson to give them some time to share some of their reflections, because I know they attend those meetings as well on this process. So thank you so much. And thank you, AJ, for being here as well.
Thank you, Superintendent. You said everything that I would have said if I had more brain cells. So thank you for saying all that, because it's really important. Yeah, and the interpreters. Yeah, so agree on everything you said, people's time, and definitely the Vice Chair for all the connections, all the years he's been on the school committee. He's just a wealth of knowledge and information, and I just really appreciate him. Appreciate all of you and AJ, and also Kamani. I know it's a school night, so we appreciate it. Okay, so, and you too, Superintendent. So without further ado, if there's nothing else, I'd like to entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you, Ms. Robinson. Is there a second? Thank you, Mr. O'Neill. Is there any discussion or objection to this motion? Ms. Sullivan, can you please call the roll?
Dr. Coleman,
Yes, have a great day.
Dr. Rivera,
Yes.
Ms. Robinson,
Yes.
Mr. Tran,
Yes, good night.
Mr. O'Neill,
Yes.
Ms. Oliver Davila.
Yes.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Liz. Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.